Hello and welcome to Boss Door, the final threshold beyond which games must test... You know what? Fuck it, alright? We gotta talk. I'm here, you won't believe this, I'm here with Hidetaka Miyazaki, head of From Software, makers of Dark Souls, and the upcoming Elden Ring. And they're here, literally won't believe, they're here with an exclusive on Elden Ring, including the release date. Mr. Miyazaki, take it away.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No, thank you.
Well, what do you want to know?
Well, I mean, tell me about Elden Ring. Like, what's going on? When is it going to come out? Has COVID affected the release dates? Was it about? How is your relationship with George R. R. Martin? Literally anything would be great at this point.
Well, there's no official release date of Elden Ring, but we do want to...
What are you doing?
We're doing the,
We were supposed to do Detroit Day. Who is this guy?
This is Hidetaka Miyazaki?
Get out of here!
But I flew here from Japan. It's 2 o'clock in the morning for me.
Are we doing Detroit this month?
We spent 50 hours on it. Of course we're doing Detroit this month.
Oh, man. Miyazaki, you gotta go.
What? But
Get out of here.
You gotta go!
I 16... It took 32 hours to get here.
Nobody cares how long it took you to...
Detroit's real bad.
It's an embarrassment at this point.
The shallowest and dumbest way to explore this concept. The start menu is quoting civil rights shit at you.
It's sad, and it's racist, and it's offensive.
A haunted zombie mansion, a Holocaust,
The Underground Railroad.
Yeah. Oh no, the robots learned free will and took over Detroit.
Oh no!
It's been a stressful couple of hours.
Welcome back to Boss Door.
Detroit is one of those games where it's inextricably linked to its creator, who's become kind of notorious in the gaming industry.
Right.
Do you want to explain, people who don't know, David Cage is kind of who he is? And
Yeah, so David Cage is a bit of... Some people would use the word auteur. Most people would use the word hack. Not to poison the well too early, but I don't feel so bad about that in this particular review. But David Cage is a French developer and co-CEO of Quantic Dream Studios. And he's really known for he's known for a lot of scandals in the gaming industry that we don't really need to get into. But one thing he's particularly known for in his games are what I want to call like David Cage controls, because they're so specific to his games. So what his controls are like is if your character were to open a door, you would have to, on like the right thumbstick, you would have to rotate the thumbstick in a circle so that you would mimic the movements of the character, like turning the door handle, right? They're mimetic controls. When you're crawling, you'll have to like alternate hitting L1 and R1 to move your arms so that you can like drag yourself forward. You have to do this for basically every action that your character takes throughout the entire game. And on top of that, you have like dialogue trees, and whenever actions require actual like flow of movement, you'll do a bunch of quick time events in a row. Usually this is like a fight or a chase scene.
yeah, what I think it is basically going to be boiled down to his games. The only gameplay they have are of 2 modes: quick time events and dialogue trees. And then the rest of the game is supposed to feel like a movie.
Yeah, except in a movie you watch people do things and they do things fluidly. Under David Cage's controls, his mimetic controls, the game will literally stop until you do the motion. And some of the most fun you can have with the games, you can see this on YouTube, is people like just stopping halfway to turning a doorknob or something like that. Because it's funny, because literally time stops until you continue what you're doing.
Some would argue the only fun you can have in a David Cage game.
Yeah, so if these controls sound like bad and wonky, it's because they are. All right? To put it in perspective, his controls were considered a footnote in the annals of gaming history when he did them in Indigo Prophecy more than a decade ago. Then they were considered a joke when he did them in Heavy Rain, one of his other games. And now they're a downright embarrassment.
They're a meme.
They are a meme for Detroit Become Human and for his previous game, Beyond Two Souls. David Cage controls have never been good. They have never been reviewed well. No one has ever said, wow, this is an interesting way to do a game. In fact, all of David Cage's games have been critically panned nonstop.
One thing that I think Ross and I like to talk about a lot that David Cage falls under is what I call the George Lucas syndrome, right? Where he's so much creative control over what he makes, and seemingly no one can say no. And the more control he has, the worse it gets because he's just bad at his job.
Exactly. He just makes bad games. He's a hack writer with a gimmick that is 20 years too old and is still making it into what most people would consider a AAA title at this point.
And so the thing with Detroit is, it's not just that it's like a painfully unfun game. The worst part of the game is the story, which is the only reason to make your game this way. To make your game so focused on kind of cinematic choice-based stuff is if you think you have something compelling to say. But this is the only game of Dave Cage I've played. But listening to the people describe other games, it seems like they have less than nothing to say, all of them.
Yeah, that's always true. David Cage mostly just bases his games on like movies he's seen, and that's kind of it. He just has like this fascination with like film noir aesthetic, but he doesn't really have anything to say about that. So let's go into the game, because this game, we believe, is predicated solely on the thought, what if robots had emotions? And the story ended there.
The game is set with 3 different pathways that are supposed to kind of demonstrate different things about robots. The first one you see, and by far the most interesting, is Connor and his cop friend Hank, and you basically just follow their missions which I guess is to stop robots from gaining free will. I think that's their mission as cops, right?
I don't know. It seemed maybe to like find out why they're gaining free will. I'm not sure either of them is qualified to handle this.
Normal cop stuff, right? It's just like the 2 of them in Camus just going around trying to philosophically understand.
Yeah, it's like if you hired Chips to be like, can you explain robot consciousness? What do you mean, sir? I mean, go to these crime scenes, these murders, and find out why robots are gaining consciousness.
Did you mean Chips like the show with the cops?
California Highway Police, yes.
Or did you just mean like Chips? Because like that's how it feels sometimes, some of these characters.
I could be talking about computer chips. Robots can be people now.
It would be really good, yeah. Sorry, I was like that.
They should make a cool game about that.
Anyways,
Play Nier Automata.
Anyways, we have this game. Then the other branch you have is Marcus, who is starts a robot revolution. You have to start the robot revolution. The game doesn't actually give you a choice. And the only thing that really matters to him is whether you are violent or non-violent, which again has pretty much no bearing on anything except for aesthetics. It affects exactly one choice if you go violent, and also you can just throw a different robot at the problem if you so desire. And then last character you follow is Kara, who's a house cleaning robot, I guess. What do we call those? Robot maid.
Maid, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Kara's actually interesting, right? And this is why I say the game. Well, okay, no. I'm interesting from a criticism standpoint, because this is why I say the game started and ended with thought, what if robots had emotions? Because Kara is in a little like short, like an animated short that I guess David Cage put out, which was really just like a tech demo for what his company was capable of doing. But it was this little short where they were assembling a robot called Kara. The short is called Kara. And while they're assembling her, she like starts talking about what she wants and how she feels and stuff. And they start disassembling her, and she starts to like cry and scream, and they stop disassembling her, and they let her go. It's just a very small bit. It's very like emotionally evocative. It's really, really well made. But it's just a very short story about like a robot that just had sentience. And wow, that's weird. That short spawned this game. And I don't think they took the thought any further than that.
Yeah, because instead of like dealing with Kara, intuiting a fear of non-existence, which could be interesting, instead it's mostly her taking care of a little girl. And if you ever let that girl leave, you just stop being a character.
Yeah, Kara just disappears.
Yeah, her literal only purpose in this game is to take care of a little girl.
Yeah.
Because to finish what her story was
I think it just did.
Yeah, but it's you start as a caretaker with a dad. The dad is abusive. You run away, and then you're just trying to escape with this girl to Canada because common plot point. Nothing bad can happen in Canada.
Yeah.
You just go to Canada.
Yeah,
everyone actually likes robots there.
Canada's great. Well, robots, there are no robots in Canada. That's what they say. There's just
no robots.
The company that makes robots that like has revolutionized all of America, at the least, from what we can tell, just doesn't operate in Canada.
That's like,
so, the great North.
That's like literally going to Canada now and being like, do you have an Apple charger for my phone? No one has Apple here. No one? No, yeah, it's not. We don't allow it in our country.
You just gotta be like, well, I mean, I can't disagree with that policy, but at the same time, you don't have Apple?
Yeah, how is this logistically possible? So the idea is the pathways are supposed to intersect, and decisions you make on each of them will affect the others. It's not super true.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Because like the way Connor works is you go on a series of missions, and you can fail or not fail your missions. And there's a point at the end of the game, at the end of Connor's run mostly, where you have an evidence room and you have to like figure out where Marcus is using the evidence based on how well you've done the previous missions.
Yeah, the evidence you've accumulated in your previous missions, which would be like things you've picked up or like dead androids you've murdered, that kind of thing.
But it also seems like incredibly easy to do that.
It is incredibly easy.
And that doesn't affect other pathways, right? Marcus affects, I guess, just public opinion. But it feels like the Marcus Pass is kind of supposed to be the main theme of the game, of a thinly veiled... I don't even want to say it's an analogy, but for civil rights movement. It's like, what if robots had civil rights, except for we took it all over the span of 4 days and didn't understand what the hell they were talking about?
Allegory, I think, is the word you would be looking for in that scenario, but that would imply an intentionality behind it that isn't there. So, like, what we have to talk about up front is the outright theft of imagery from, like, the American Civil Rights Movement and the Holocaust to put into your game about robots gaining freedom. Now, I understand why you would think that those things are related to some degree, but David Cage has been on record stating that he was not intending to imitate the civil rights movement or the Holocaust. He basically said, you can see that in my game if you want to, but I just made a game about androids. And yet, you have Marcus writing slogans from Dr. Martin Luther King, right? You literally, like, spray paint, "We have a dream" on a wall.
The
right?
fucking opening screen quotes Martin Luther's screen. The start menu is quoting civil rights shit at you.
Yeah, it is. And of course they picked Detroit, one of the most racially divided cities in America, with a history of racial violence in it. And then all the robots, they wear armbands, and they have like triangles, and the triangle's like the symbol of cyber life, but it's clearly displayed as like a metaphor for Jewish people during the Holocaust because they were forced to wear those things, and then later they're put into concentration camps by the actual humans, and it's just incredible the lengths that David Cage went to steal all this imagery without any of the backstory, without any connective tissue between those things, without trying to make a statement. He actively is like, oh, I'm not making a statement, but I'm going to use all this imagery, all this important imagery from history that represents people that are alive today.
It feels like he's trying to gain social currency with his game by kind of displaying it like, oh, look, we're saying something about race, when they're also clearly not. They're just kind of using imageries of oppression to be like, remember when that happened? But, like, there isn't really an exploration of, like, the robot struggles or even why people dislike robots. The only thing you know is that there's a high unemployment rate. I think they quote 38% unemployment because of robots. And so then everyone just hates robots and wants to break them, but also...
Well, because robots are taking their jobs, right?
Yeah,
but
which is
like,
again another...
It's just another minority that he's gonna rip off.
You, the audience, think that when you're playing a game about robots gaining free will and sentience, that you might be more thinking about, well, Why would they care if people don't like them? Why would they care if they, are getting hit because they don't have pain receptors? But instead, it's just, they're getting oppressed, so they rise up because that's what you do. Marcus starts and executes a revolution in the span of 6 days. And also, the beginning of his days are just helping an old man.
Yeah. Marcus is, first of all, he's our only black character, right? And he's the revolutionary leader. I'm not saying this because I want his race to be important. I'm saying it because it is important in the game, right? Well, it's supposed to be important in the game, but instead they just made him black so that they could, make it more racially toned.
Yeah, like it feels like they did it out of obligation, right? Like it feels like they're like, we probably should make this character.
Well, they know they're stealing all this imagery from the civil rights, so like, I guess our revolutionary leader should be black. And I mean, they're right if they had done it properly.
So this is supposed to be the person who's rising up. So what's his life like, that makes him kind of see the robot plight? Well, the first thing you do with him is you're helping a rich painter who is an old white guy who is actually just great. He's
super nice.
Yeah.
No, he's super nice to Marcus. He's really nice. He's really cultured. He helps Marcus, like he helps him really become more sentient. Like he's like you should read these books and play the piano and like learn to paint. And I know you're an android, but I think you have a soul. That kind of guy, which is a weird way to start off your race allegory. Be like, I know you're my servant. I know you're literally my slave and you have to do everything that I say. But like, I'm gonna be a real good guy.
And seeing Marcus kind of interact with like the anti-robot stuff is all kind of in one scene where it's literally the first thing. It's the boringest chapter. You walk and get paint, and as you're walking by, you see people protesting robots because they're taking the jobs. You see like a priest saying it's an abomination. People are just kind of like, "Don't look at me, asshole," to the robot. It's just like a weird general animosity towards them. And then when he gets home and he's asked about it, he's kind of like, "No, it's just no biggie."
Yeah, literally every human just hates robots. Just in general. I can't even think of an exception.
But like Marcus is also seemingly not affected by it. Like there's a scene at the end where they literally make him go to the back of the bus with all the fucking other robots. But also, why would they care? It's clearly using racist imagery. Is the idea like, I go to the back of the bus. But they're all standing in the back of the bus because they're robots. They don't need to sit. That actually just seems functionally logical.
Yeah, I'm completely fine with that, right? Like that's where that's the first part that this race allegory breaks down. Like even before it's really got started, they're like, you see them go to the back of the bus, and David Cage thinks you should be feeling empathetic about this. You should be like, oh, they shouldn't have to go to the back of the bus. But I'm like, no, they're things. Right? They're just things. They need to go stand in the back because that literally clears up space for people who can't stand, because they don't care because they're things.
And I think that's the problem. It's supposed to be a race allegory, but we haven't even kind of contended with the idea that these are actually property.
Yeah.
Right? There was a fucked up thing that people had slaves and treated humans like property because they were humans.
Yeah, because we have this idea that like humans have an inherent value through virtue of their consciousness, right? Through virtue of like the transcendent property of being humans. We don't give a shit about like Roombas.
And the idea is the game is obviously the intention of the game is, it's called Detroit Become Human. It's like, well, no, we discovered the robots are human and they do deserve these things. But that's not the focus of the game. They never show it. When they become sentient and free will, you literally just break a wall in like it's supposed to be inside their programming. There's a firewall that just stops your free will.
Yeah, so actually let's talk about Kara in this scenario, right? Because Kara starts off as like a quintessential robot. She literally gets bought. You find out her owner broke her before she went in for repairs, and he went to pick her up, brought her back home, and was like, you take care of the cooking, the cleaning, and taking care of the kid. I'm going to go do space crack on the couch. So he's doing space crack on the couch, and you have to walk around as Kara and like literally clean the house. You literally have to pick up all the stuff and put it in the trash and take the laundry out and take care of the kid. And you get to talk to Alice, who's a little girl, and she's super scared and like won't say a word because her father is abusive and her mother ran away. There's a lot of reasons she won't talk to you, but you're supposed to develop a little bit of a bond with Alice. And what's interesting during this period is you have to act like a robot. If you walk in front of the TV while Todd's doing a space crack, he will he'll be like, don't walk in front of the fucking TV. And then literal barriers come up on either side of the couch that prevent you from walking in front of the TV. It's this really interesting diegetic way of explaining that where you go when what you do is not up to you. It is up to Todd, who owns you. And it doesn't feel out of place. So you're like, well, that's, as a player, you're like, that's interesting. I literally feel like a robot right now. And then later, when Todd gets enraged and he's gonna go murder Alice upstairs, you are presented with a wall. He tells you, stay right here and don't move. And you are presented now with a wall and ostensibly a choice. You have to like literally tear down this wall that says don't move. The same walls that popped up earlier that said don't cross in front of the couch. And by doing so, you win your freedom, you go upstairs, and you probably kill Todd. I think that's what most people do. And you run away with Alice.
Very easy to kill him. There's a gun right there.
Yeah.
They make you look at it.
Yeah, they pretty much make you look at it. And so you gain your freedom through like breaking down these previously diegetic walls that literally stopped you from acting. And that's a pretty good opener for Kara's character.
But it's Detroit Become Human, so you have to undercut that mechanical thing by you can never do anything that you want. Every time you're like, oh, can I go over here? The game will just turn your character around. And half the time, literally do a cutscene of you turning around.
Yeah, that's the weird thing about this, right? Is up to that point, those walls were diegetic. They were in your programming. You couldn't go there, right? They represented the freedom you didn't have. And you tore those walls down, representing you gaining freedom. These are very simple concepts, right? But then later, when you and Alice are on a dark, rainy street, and you as the player are like, well, let me go explore, down this street. Well, it's a game. They're not going to let you go all the way down the street, right? So instead of putting a barrier in front of you, like a real life barrier, they just put up another wall, like the same walls that you tore down earlier, except now they're the game developers telling you, don't go this way. So what was diegetic is now non-diegetic. It doesn't mean anything anymore. It's just the game developers saying, you thought you had free will, but actually you're trapped in here with us.
When you get free will, and when each of the characters has a scene where they can get their free will, it doesn't feel like they change at all. It doesn't feel like they have personality now. It doesn't feel like the free will changes kind of how you feel about them, and you don't feel it mechanically as well. Like, there's supposed to be a moment where these robots become human, and then you think of them differently. And it's just not translated at all, at any point. And the first one you see is Kara.
Yeah, so Kara gets it. It's always some emotional outburst that's like something very bad is happening, and it usually ends in murder or attempted murder, or at least assault of some kind, right? So Kara is going to go fight Todd. He might die. She might die. Marcus encounters the rich white painter's tweaker son.
It's honestly the most absurd stereotype, ever. It's not fun because, everything in the game, we complain a lot about it with Final Fantasy VII, but by God, this game makes everyone walk through mud.
Yeah.
There's a point where you just have to get up the stairs with Marcus, and, I literally can probably be Donkey Kong faster. It's just insane. But you do this, it's supposed to be a nice day, and at least it's one of the more aesthetically pleasing and kind of interesting areas where you hang out with this old man. You can play chess with him, you can play the piano, you paint, he tells you how to be creative. It's this whole scene where it feels like they're actually trying to explore the themes the game is probably trying to explore or whatever.
Yeah, they're exploring them badly, but they are giving it an effort.
Yeah, they're exactly. This is a scene of actual effort. And then right before the scene ends, his tweaker son shows up and he's just like, hey, I need some money, Dad. And it's like, do you just need it for drugs? And he's just like, and then he's just like, it doesn't matter why I need it. He's just literally the most extreme Jesse Pinkman from Breaking Bad.
Yeah, it's like what if Jesse was written real bad? And then the kid's like, can I get some money? And his dad's like, no, I'm not giving you any money anymore. And the kid's like, well, why not? And his dad goes, you know why. And the kid's like, I think I do. And he points at Marcus being like, you love your robot more than me. And you gotta be like, what are you talking about? This isn't the first time this has happened. Just the idea that David Cage was like, I gotta connect this to Marcus somehow. I only have one idea, and it's the tweaker son. It's gotta go to the robot somehow, but there's no connective tissue. let's just point at the robot and say it's his fault. Everyone else in the world does it.
Yeah, he's like, are you giving the robot money? And like Marcus is just like eating an ice cream cone that they bought. Like, what is even going on? And then Kid comes back and pushes Marcus, and Marcus is like, should I defend myself and have free will? And it's just like, it just doesn't mean anything.
And also you don't have to defend yourself. Like two things about this scene. One, so the kid comes back at night and he's like rifling through, and Marcus calls the police before they know who it is. They like see the lights on in the studio, and the old man's like, call the police. And Marcus calls the police and tells them they're like, we're on our way, sir. Which is interesting because like he gives them like the place. He's like, hey, I'm at this rich old painter's house. I'm his android. I'm calling the police because somebody broke into the house. Right? Yeah. As you can expect in a game that came out, what was this, 2017?
I think 18.
I want to say 18, but I'm not sure. But as you can expect in modern times, a black man calls the police and will likely die by their hands. So Jesse Pinkman is rifling through all the stuff, and they get into a confrontation, and he starts trying to beat up Marcus, and the old man is just chewing the scenery so bad. It's the most annoying voice acting in the entire game. He's just like, Leo, stop! Leave him alone, Leo! And sorry for the noise that you're hearing, but he sounds like that like give Britney a chance meme that happened so long ago that most people probably
have no idea what you're
strongly dated ourselves when Britney Spears had a breakdown.
Yourself.
No, you're part of this. But when Britney Spears had a breakdown, there was a YouTube video that went very viral of a fan crying and screaming about leave Britney alone. And it sounds exactly like this old man crying and screaming about leave Marcus alone. So Marcus is getting beat up. And you have it keeps flashing on the screen like, this isn't fair. This isn't fair. And you have the option. Well, you don't have an option. You have to break out and become sentient. Ironically, you don't get a choice. So you become sentient, and then you're given two options, which is fight back or don't fight back. You can literally just choose to kind of get beat up anyway. You're like, you've gained freedom, but let this kid beat you up anyway. And no matter what happens, if you fight back, you shove the kid, and he hits his head, and I think he lives, but he's like severely injured. He hits his head on a thing, and if you don't fight back, old man has a heart attack and dies in your arms, and the cops kick the door open and are like, "What's going on in here?" And despite the information that they have, somebody broke into the house. I'm the android calling you for this old man. They see the android cradling an old man, and some random guy they don't know anything about it points and goes, "It was the android." And without a second thought, this white officer shoots you directly in the face.
So this is the first time I think this has come up in a scene. So this is one of those scenes where the decisions you make here have impacts later on, but they also kind of don't have impacts later on. So one of the playthroughs that we did, after we've already done one, Marcus's white owner didn't die. And then you go meet him before the last chapter at his house. And it's like, oh, if he doesn't die, you go talk to him. And then when we did another run where he did die, instead you just go to his gravestone. Marcus says the exact same dialogue to a alive old man or a dead old man.
Yeah.
Like, I think he dies in the bed when you talk,
Yeah, he dies later if you go and meet him again, which, I mean, you have to if he's alive. But it's the same dialogue. It's just, if he's dead, you're at his gravestone, and there's just no other half of the conversation. It's just Marcus asking questions to the open air.
And this is everything you know about this. Like, this is the whole arc of this old man. All it is he's just kind of supportive of robots.
Yeah. But it's also like it's
and then Marcus is like, sorry to cut you off, but like then Marcus is like, man, I guess I should just fight back for all of humanity. When his only experience is the only robot who has positive experiences with humanity.
Yeah, and so like everyone else has horrible things happen to them. I guess Connor doesn't, but Connor's a different case.
Sort of. Everyone's kind of like Hank's addicted to Connor at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean everybody's addicted to Connor at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No one's like cool. Like no one's like nurturing Connor. I know, but like the old man is nurturing Marcus. Like this person is actually trying to like grow this character's sentience.
Yeah, which again is a very weird thing to have in your racial strafe allegory, right? Is like your one black character, the revolutionary leader, started his life as a slave under an old white man who was just like real good to him, and it's like probably the best human you meet in the entire game.
And like when you are doing, you literally spend most of the game when you're Marcus in like a fucking old tanker.
Yeah.
And you kind of consider like, man, maybe his life was better when he was a slave. And like you kind of don't want that sentence to happen during a race allegory.
Exactly.
You don't want to conjure those thoughts, in my opinion.
It just shows the sheer ineptness of their ability to write this story. Like how does nobody say anything about that? And it's because David Cage is writing the story and nobody says no to David Cage. He just writes something horribly racist and, you know, makes $1 billion off of it. They're opening a new studio in Montreal in 2020, or they started construction in 2020, something like that. So, you know, they did pretty well on this game.
As long as we're gonna have to get to with Marcus, mostly about how bad his just fucking gameplay is, and how everything is just boring and slow, and they make you wait for a green light to walk across crosswalks. I can't believe that's a thing in games. That's insane.
Yeah, it's incredible. Once you gain your sentience, you still have to abide by like jaywalking rules.
But we initially were talking about, to lead off, the things we actually liked about that game, and then I think we just forgot it because
I think we said basically everything I like about the game already.
But the least the best part of the game is Connor and Hank.
Yeah,
and
far and away.
It probably has the best gameplay, even though after a while I was like, I actually hate doing this now.
Yeah, they have a unique gameplay mechanic to Connor and Hank. It is something we see in most of the rest of David Cage's games, but let's talk about Connor and Hank. So Connor is a robot sent by CyberLife, the company that makes all the robots, and he is going to help Hank, who is Clancy Brown.
People might not know who he is, the voice actor. He's pretty prolific, but he does Lex Luthor in the old Warner Brothers cartoons. He's Lao Feng in Avatar: The Last Airbender. He's always good at playing like a gruff, evil voice guy.
Yeah, but in this case, he's playing the drunk, old, grizzled detective.
He's a loose cannon.
He's a loose cannon cop. And so Connor has to go. Your first scene together is like Connor has to go find him in a bar, and Connor's like, "I have checked 4 other bars before this and found you here." And he's like, "I don't want to go to the crime scene." And he's like, "Well, you have to." And so they go to the crime scene. There's not really much more to say about that.
Actually, like this is why it's the funnest part of the game, because it's just kind of silly. Like it's just a buddy cop.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is like from a plot perspective, you can't say a lot happens in these scenes, but their banter feels like real and interesting because it is Connor's the straight man and Hank is the loose cannon cop with nothing to lose.
And he's like over the like. I don't want to give David Cage too much credit because he just wrote him over the top, but he wrote him over the top that like it's kind of back to fun. Like,
yeah,
I think in that scene he's like, "Leave the bottle," to, like the bartender. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, he literally won't talk to Connor, and then Connor's like, "I'll buy you a drink," and he's like, "I'll hear what you have to say." It really is. It's so over the top. It's fun.
Yeah, but the way their gameplay works is there's a mission you do, and then you look for clues. And then you kind of have to, like, reconstruct things, and it's basically you just going into a pause screen and hitting triangle on a bunch of different points to be like, that's a stab wound, that's blood. And then it's like...
Well, if it's blood, you have to taste it.
Yeah, you have to.
Connor will always dip his fingers in blood and then lick them slowly.
Which doesn't make sense because he's a robot. No. Why would that be
it doesn't.
processing?
And it's always... There's only 2 kinds of blood in this world. It's not like there's a bunch of different things. It's like, if it's red, it's human. And if it's blue, it belongs to androids. And that's all the information you ever get from this. He literally licks his hand and it just pops up saying, like, that's blue blood. And I'm like, we knew that! We knew that! Connor, you just have a problem. You don't have to lick all the blood you see. But he literally does. Every single investigation, Connor will lick some blood.
It endears him to Hank. God, what I used to do when I was a kid.
Oh yeah, that's how I got my badge.
Yeah, but all the scenes are like, okay, here's a body, and you see a bunch of stab wounds, a bunch of blood. You're looking at it. And then after you, like, highlight, like, every stab wound and everything, there'll be a little, like, reenactment with, like, wire figures. And then you have to like figure out what the scene is, but it's always like, guy has stab wounds covered in blood, and then you go through the thing, and it's like, he was stabbed. Yeah. You're like, Hank could have done that, and like, guy was stabbed over here. Like that doesn't seem.
Yeah, well, the crime scenes are always filled with other cops, but they always just stand in one position and talk. Yeah. While Connor, the only one there who's not a cop, goes around and solves the mystery.
Yeah.
But it's not really a mystery. It's just like, yeah, this guy was stabbed, and that's it. But Connor's the only one that can do anything.
Yeah, so you kind of collect evidence with Hank, and it's kind of fun because you get the good banter. I don't think the collecting the evidence is particularly fun gameplay, but that's because the gameplay in this game isn't fun. But it's much better than literally washing fucking dishes.
Yeah, it's not the worst thing. And the reenactments, while kind of boring, it's sort of an interesting concept.
It's one of the few things in the game that make you think about what's happening kind of off camera.
Yeah.
Like how do these cop robots work? You know what I mean?
In much better hands, I would like to see that same mechanic in another game.
Yeah, I would argue the whole game should just be Connor and Hank. They should just skip the whole race.
Oh, absolutely.
Shit, and we should just be doing, like, if you wanted to make a dumb game about robots, you should do that. And you just, like, you can have the whole Connor dealing with if he should have free will or not. In that character, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
But of course, we have to.
It's way easier to do an allegory when you're dealing with, like, one character than balancing 3 characters in a revolution.
Yeah.
Like, this game should have been a buddy cop movie where, like, Connor slowly gains sentience, and through Connor becoming human, Hank, who's this heartless old grizzled cop, finds his heart again and returns to his own humanity. They meet in the middle and they're best friends at the end, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's a way better game already.
The other thing that's interesting with Connor mechanically is if he dies, he just comes back. CyberLife just gives him a new body.
Yeah, he's the only one in the game.
And so everyone else, when they die, you just literally lose a third of the game. But Connor keeps coming back, and that's also, like, kind of fun and interesting. Like, it's weird because there's only one scene in the game where Hank reacts to it. Like, if you die later in the game, Hank just is like, oh, he's back, and doesn't seem to care, But if you die at, like, the first opportunity, I think, Hank is like, Jesus Christ, where did I saw you die?
Yeah, and Connor's just like, I am an android sent by CyberLife. You saw a Connor die. And Hank's like, that's fucked up.
Yeah, and, like, that's interesting because, like, that at least kind of allows you to, like, feel why people would have, like, animosity towards androids. Because it's just weird. You're like, oh, that's weird. Like, I don't know how to, like, deal with that.
Yeah, it's like, oh, we define things as being alive through their ability to die. And, like, robots don't have that. It's such a stark difference between the androids in the game and the humans that, like, you can easily understand why people would be hesitant to accept them as, like, living things, Yeah,
exactly. And, like, whereas all we've seen with the person who starts the revolution again is just a kindly old person who's, like, being nurturing. And then the son that pushes him, that sends him down his path, has no reason to dislike him. It makes no sense.
No, it's completely arbitrary. And so, like, Hank and Connor, they're the buddy cop throughout the movie, throughout the game. And they're...
Is this a game?
That's a real question that I don't even know how to begin. In many ways, I think no.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about that more later, but I just knew that's something you had a lot of thoughts on.
Yeah.
Probably not the best time to talk about now.
Yeah, we'll talk about it more towards the end, the actual philosophy of the thing. We don't have time to go through the entire plot line. Because as much as it's not really a branching story, and I'll explain this here, why I say that, it does have a lot of different things that can happen, so we can't cover every scene in the game in, like, a clinical way. But when I say it doesn't, like, it has different scenes, but it doesn't have branching plot lines, we can just say, like, what happens to the other characters when they die. So when Connor dies, because he is critical to the core of the story, which is Marcus's revolution, Connor, basically, like, Marcus does stuff, and Connor sort of follows behind investigating androids, and they meet near the end, right?
Yeah.
And Kara is just off doing her own thing, really. You would think that Connor and Marcus's actions sort of affect Kara's story because Kara is, like, developing a family. She's got a little girl, and later you meet this other android, Luther, and he becomes, like, the father. Well, he doesn't become. He's implied to be, like, the father figure. He doesn't have any character. We'll talk about Luther in depth, but Kara goes through her journey and, like, develops a family and becomes sort of the most human of all of them. Right? That's supposed to be her journey, but she does. It's not actually, like, a character arc. She just starts that way, and she doesn't change for the rest of the game. She's just always the caring mother archetype.
Yeah.
Now, Kara can die almost right at the beginning. The first time she has an opportunity to die is when you have to go rescue Alice from her father, Todd. Todd can kill you in that scene. Now, in another game, a game that I would consider to actually have branching storylines, that death would be important. You don't necessarily have to have the character continue forward, obviously, but her death should have repercussions on the rest of the story. Instead, she just ceases to exist.
It's also probably the best way to play the game, because the care stuff always interrupts any, like, flow that the game is almost creating. And,
yeah,
like,
because Marcus and Connor are sort of intertwined.
Yeah, exactly. Like, all the time, right? It will just be like, oh, okay, you know, Hank and Connor getting some buddy cop. This is pretty cool. And then it's just like, you want to find somewhere to sleep tonight? And you're like,
no.
Not really. And there's, like, you know, several options of places you can sleep, right? But only one has something interesting happen. Like, if you just, like, go sleep at a motel, all that happens is you sleep at a motel.
Yeah, we're talking about Kara here, but yeah, Kara has various options. When she escapes from Todd, she can go sleep, and it's like, sleep in a car, or a hotel, or an abandoned building with an insane robot who's gonna try to feed Alice rats.
Yeah, which is actually fun and interesting.
That's the most fun you can have in that scene.
But kind of getting off the point, but it's just so jarring when you go from, like, a heist with Marcus to, like, her, like, hiding in a closet from a cop. You know what I mean? Or going from, you know, a good Connor and Hank scene to, like, slowly walking into an abandoned amusement park. And it just, like, all of those descriptions make it sound better than they actually are. Like, I want to be very clear. These suck.
Well, because you hear the words abandoned amusement park and your mind lights up. You think, oh, there's got to be, like, some interesting things you can do with an abandoned amusement park, right? Except they don't do any of those things.
Yeah, but, like,
you just walk in and it's as boring as it would be in real life.
And everything you're always doing is just like, find a place for Alice to sleep, find Alice clothing, give her a bath, do this, and it's just like,
yeah, because Kara is defined by her relationship to Alice, who is the daughter, right? So, like, you take your one female lead and you make her the archetypal mother, and then that's it. Like, that's the end of her character right then and there. And so everything is defined by Alice's needs, and, like, Alice is hungry, Alice is tired, Alice has to get clothes.
And you're just doing chores.
Yeah, you're literally just doing, ironically, you're just doing chores for Alice.
Yeah.
Instead of, you know.
So the best thing you can do is have Todd strangle you.
Yeah, it's both the fastest way to play the game, and it's probably the most engaging way to play the game, is to just kill Kara off as soon as possible. The game is indistinguishable without her, except there's just less random cuts to random stuff. So Marcus got shot in the face and wakes up later in, I don't know how to describe this. Android Graveyard doesn't do it justice. Massive piles of android bodies, corpses, half-living amalgams of parts. Like, literally android hell. And it's described later as android hell. And for some reason, he's, like, missing a lot of his body now. He's missing an eye, his ear's messed up, his leg's gone. I don't know how this all happened.
They're explosive shrapnel bullets. Like, I don't.
Standard issue to cops in the future.
I would say this leads off the back-to-back two worst chapters in the game with Marcus. Not just the worst chapters for Marcus, worst chapters of the game, and they're both in a row with Marcus.
Yeah.
You have to just crawl so slowly, and not one decision happens in a game that's supposed to be based on decisions.
No, if you actually look at the wiki, they talk about chapters that, like, have only one outcome, and this is one of the ones that they're just like, yeah, there's only one way out of this one. So you have to crawl through this android graveyard and, like, pull parts off of other androids and slowly rebuild yourself, which is a problem later because a lot of androids just get shot and die immediately, like they're just people. Even though in the opening scene we see Connor get shot and he's fine, but then he gets shot a bunch and he's not fine. It's like you can repair androids. So they don't even seem to have a permanent death, except that in the only case of Connor and this one time with Marcus, every other android has permanent death throughout the rest of the game.
It's a big problem in the game where the internal rules are just never consistent.
Yeah, because every scene in this game is conceived of in isolation. David Cage thought it would be very cool to have Marcus crawl his way through this huge pile of bodies, and half of them are, like, crying and screaming and begging for death or begging you not to kill them as you like tear their heart out and put it in your own. It's emotionally evocative, theoretically. But in the context of the game, it's a wild departure in tone.
Yeah, you were just with an old man who's just like, paint and play the piano. And then you just crawl out of this fucking graveyard. And then the next fucking Marcus chapter is you going around town looking for graffiti to find the secret hidden robot base, but also obeying crosswalks still.
Yeah, but I want to talk about this chapter a little bit more because it's one of the most baffling chapters in the game to me. As you play the game, or if you've played other Cage games, you just know that like Cage has a certain fascination with like sort of B-movie levels of horror. Not B-movie, the Seinfeld thing, but like B-movies. So he just
like the DreamWorks movie with the B, right?
Like the other.
Well, I assume there was a Seinfeld B movie, but usually Pixar and DreamWorks, they both make one, so I don't know if there's another B movie.
So you don't know if there's another B movie, but you're positing that there may be another B movie out in the world.
I would think it would be statistically likely, yeah.
Yeah, you would be wrong. So...
Can we just talk about B movies?
So David Cage has this fascination with horror, and that's why stuff like this exists. So his games aren't very like tonally consistent. You just get elements of horror that are just thrown in there, and you'll get one with Kara. You know,
yeah, as I say, like they just threw. There's a whole fucking horror mansion.
Yeah,
and like nothing makes sense except for it's a horror mansion.
Yeah, so you just have to accept that. But basically, it ends up Marcus tears parts off of various robots, puts himself back together, and then crawls his way up out of hell. And there's like a piece of pipe sticking out of the ground with just a jacket fluttering in the wind. And he picks up that jacket like it was just waiting for him,
yeah.
You know, for no reason. He looks directly into the camera, and he goes, "My name is Marcus," and just walks into the distance.
It doesn't mean anything.
That's the thing; it means nothing, right? Because Marcus presumably was the name given to him. We see that robots are given names by people, so presumably this is literally his slave name, right?
Yeah.
Was given to him by the old man that owns him. And we never see him divest himself of that name, right? Names are important. It can be meaningful to have your character declare their name. But in this case, well, let me talk about it historically a little bit in the context of the civil rights. Malcolm X, right? A well-known civil rights advocate. The reason he is called Malcolm X is because his original last name was given to his family by slave owners. Whatever name his family had from Africa was lost to him, and he rejected the name that was given to him as a slave and chose to go by Malcolm X instead. He declared his name in a way that declared also his own freedom. Marcus, his name was never in question. It was never divested. We just know him as Marcus, and it didn't seem like to be a problem. And it's so weird for him to walk into the camera and be like, "My name is Marcus," like it's an important moment. And you can just see like the hamster in David Cage's head like spinning his wheels, being like, "Yeah," and then I'll have him like say his name, right? Because like that's what action heroes would do or something.
Well, like the whole scene is evocative of straight up fucking Terminator.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't know, like maybe like the beginning of this guy deciding that he wants to like lead a robot resistance. He shouldn't feel like he's about to be a Terminator. Like, I don't know. It's just super fucking weird choice.
Yeah. And that's my point is like, even when you're stealing from the civil rights movement, you have this precedent that if you read about the things that you're talking about, you might know these things and you could work them into your game and like have them be useful character moments. But instead, it just like nothing happens. As David Cage doesn't do any research or put any forethought into what he's writing. And he just thought it would be cool, so he put it in. And it wasn't. It's weird and awkward and arbitrary.
It's also, so I honestly just grouped this chapter and the graffiti chapter together.
Yeah.
Because it's super fucking weird that the second that Marcus becomes free and has sentience and we can explore what that is, he spends 2 chapters and Ross literally already said all of the dialogue he'll say.
Yeah.
In 2 full chapters. It's just him crawling through a graveyard and then parkouring through a city to find a secret base.
That sounds way more fun than it is, because you don't get to do the parkour. It happens just like the investigations where you like look at a point and you create a wireframe model that does the jumps for you. And then once you found the right route to parkour up, the game just parkours for you. And it does a bunch of jump cuts. So it's not like a steady shot of like Marcus even parkouring across the walls and up ladders and stuff. They just do a bunch of jump cuts where it's like he'll grab like a rung of a ladder and then it jump cuts and he's just standing on top of whatever he was. So you don't even like get to see the cool action. They just make you do the boring stuff and then don't let you see or do the fun things.
And if you like just look at what this is mechanically, it literally you get to a gap you can't go. The screen pauses, and then you pan your camera across 3 possible cutscenes. And one cutscene clearly tells you it works. It just says, this is the right cutscene. And you go, okay, click that cutscene. And it's just like, why is it just not a cutscene? Like, why is that the method? You don't feel engaged being like, I have to cross this. Press triangle over here. And you're like, okay.
Yeah,
you know.
But basically, I mean, this chapter is kind of hard to describe. We're probably not doing the best job, but basically, you're looking for hidden symbols because a dying robot in the graveyard beamed into your brain the location of Jericho, which is a place we don't know what it is yet. Turns out to be an abandoned boat called the Jericho. And he's just like, go there. And for some reason, you do that. I guess because you have nothing else to do.
Just the whole thing that's super egregious about this chapter to me is you're going to have the worst gameplay in the whole fucking game, and yet you don't get an ounce of meaning from any of it. Like, maybe the graveyard looks aesthetically cool to some people. It does it to me. And then the other chapter, just there's nothing, like, it just doesn't need to exist.
Yeah. It's complete filler, really. But you parkour through the city, you find Jericho, you get into the ship, and then you've got to kind of like wander the halls for a bit. And there's a bunch of doors you go in, but I kind of want to talk about this a little bit because it goes back to the controls. There's a bunch of doors you can open, and doors in a ship are not doors. They don't have door handles. They're called watertight doors, and they have like big, wheels that you turn. If you were to open one of those doors in a David Cage game, normally you would, just spin around your control stick and it would do the door handle turning motion. This one, all of the doors have random buttons assigned to them that are always different amongst all the doors. So like one of the doors, I think I had to press 3 or 4 buttons to open it, which is like more buttons than the characters literally doing anything with.
I use all of my fingers to open this door individually.
Exactly. It actually is kind of like playing a co-op game. In a lot of ways. Okay, so co-op was an ancient Flash game where Q, W, O, and P on your keyboard were linked each to one arm and one leg. Each of them. And the goal was just to make a character move any distance. And it was incredibly hard and stupid. It spawned games that are like Octodad and stuff like that. Or Surgeon Simulator, where you control each finger, where you try to do surgery on a body. They were just
saying how much fun that sounds.
It's way more fun because they take it seriously. But David Cage is like, well, what if that, but worse somehow, right? And so it's weird that like each door has different controls, despite them all being essentially the same door. And this is true throughout the game of like everything that you do. Everything that you do is not consistent across the game. I'm talking around it. Let me just talk about what I want to say here. It's about the nature of controls in video games. So, when you think about playing a video game, you understand that you have to have a controller in your hand. And if you consider David Cage's thought process, it's like, well, what if your controller would better mimic the movements that your character does? That's interesting. And when we take it forward in actual video games, we get into something like VR, right? Where it actually reads your movements and mimics them in certain ways. That's what we consider the future of video games, and that's like the core idea behind Cage's concept here. But instead of doing that, Cage doesn't make any sort of effort to make the controls actually mimetic, or doesn't realize that you just can't do that with a controller. The purpose of a controller is simply to be a middleman between the player intention and what happens on screen. Your buttons should impede you as little as possible, right? The function of buttons essentially is to remove your knowledge that buttons exist at all, right? That's why the games have generic interact buttons, right? So if you're going through the game and you see like 100 treasure chests, every time you walk up to a chest, you expect it to be the same button to open it. In a David Cage game, every single chest will be a different button, or perhaps a series of buttons to open each one individually. And it makes you unable to immerse yourself because you always have to be thinking about your controls. Because it's not just when you open a door, it's when you open a door, or you want to look at something, or you want to pick something up, or you want to swipe a tablet or something like that. When you want to pull a gun, when you want to do anything, you have to do some kind of quick time. And since there's no consistency, you're thinking always about your controller and never about what's happening on screen.
You can never guess what the quick time is.
Exactly.
Like, I was using this example when we were talking about Last of Us, where there's a scene where you run towards a guy, and it tells you to press square, and you kick the guy. But the way it works is the second square comes up, it feels like that's the button I was thinking, because it feels, in my opinion, the most...
It actually doesn't even tell you to hit square. You just don't have a weapon, and the game has trained you that square is your melee.
Yeah.
So there's a guy like strangling Ellie, and you run up, and you just hit the melee button.
And it turns into a cutscene of a kick, and it feels...
It's seamless.
Because you're like, that's what I want to do. Someone was attacking Ellie. I want to, as quickly as possible, violently throw that person off.
Yeah.
Right? Where, in this game, you get to a fucking door, and you're straight up like,
It's like, all right, I need you to hold L2, now hold R2, now quickly tap square while still holding both of those buttons, and your character will open a door. There's a point where you shoot a gun, which is just pull the trigger. Like, it's already aimed at somebody, and it's literally just pull the trigger on a gun. It is 4 button presses.
Yeah.
Like, it's unbelievable. Because David Cage doesn't, like, he knows that his control schemes are impossible, so he just does it as the gimmick. As, like, the thing. If he makes it... If there's a game made by David Cage, it has to have David Cage controls. And that's god-awful.
And then the other problem was not just the controls being this way, is they do it for so much crap you shouldn't have to do in a game. You lay down a file on a table, any door you interact with, to put down a bag. Like, every little thing they make a controller input for. And, like, I don't need a controller input for that.
Exactly. And that's kind of my soapbox on David Cage controls as a whole. They just don't make sense. I think they're antithetical to what we want our control schemes in games to be. When we think of the future of games, we think of stuff like VR, where controllers are literally gone. David Cage is stuck in some ancient past that never existed. And he's not gonna change. And it's sad, and as I said at the beginning, it's an embarrassment at this point.
There really is so much to go with how fundamentally every bit of the part of a game that should be a game, the control you, the player, has, is just fundamentally broken.
Yeah.
So, one, you can never run. You just literally can't run this game.
There's so many times I just press a random button thinking, usually like R2, which is like important things vision, but it's because other games have just trained me that there must be a run button. I play this game, and probably once an hour, you'll just see me randomly hit R2, and I'll be like, oh, I just thought that was a run button.
There are, like, a small handful of scenes where they're like, okay, this is the chase scene. You can actually move fast. But then they just don't do it for any of the scenes that actually have tension. Yeah, Kara escaping from Todd.
But also, the actual running mechanics are so bad in this game. Because, like, as Connor, you'll have to, like, chase Kara at some point. When Kara finds a place to sleep and she wakes up, if she gets caught by the police, Connor chases her. Now, if Connor even lightly grazes anyone on the street, any human person on the street, he will come to a full stop in the middle of your chase scene. Now, any other game would have a little animation that you, like, shove them out of the way, right? Mm-hmm. Any other game in the world, we've had this forever. But they just didn't bother. They're like, well, what if people were obstacles? I'm like, yeah, well, what if we're playing Banjo-Kazooie? What are you talking about?
Yeah,
you know? Yeah. It's insane. You're like, oh, chasing. It's kind of hard. You're on a sidewalk. It's hard to avoid all the people. So you'll inevitably hit one. And Connor just stops. And it's not like an animation plays. It's just like you kind of move, you kind of like phase through their body and then come to a full stop and then go back to running. And it's like they just didn't think about it.
And there's like whole fucking scenes of like that they just make you walk down basically a runway at like the speed of molasses.
Yeah.
And it's just so ridiculous. And then on top of it, there aren't any options in the options menus. Like if you go to control section It says you can invert the axes, you can turn the
speaker on the controller off.
on the controller or vibration. That's it for controls.
Yeah, that's all controls.
For video, you can adjust the brightness. That is it.
Yeah.
For audio, you can set it to large TV, small TV, or headphones. That's all the audio.
You can't even like adjust the sound mixing.
Yeah, which is insane.
It's insane. Like, that's so bad it must be intentional.
Yeah, that's like being so cocky. You're like, I perfectly mix the sound.
Yeah. How could
Everyone
anybody?
hears the same.
Yeah. How could anybody not want to hear things exactly the way I mix them? It's like, well, that's idiotic. That's absurd.
In a game about like free will and choices and agency, can't do anything with your player. We haven't even gone into how everything is a dead end. How every time we went back and we're like, okay, well, if you do this, it's supposed to give a different outcome. And then it's literally just the same thing with a different coat of paint. Like, if Carl's alive or dead, Marcus says the same thing.
Yeah, and then he dies. It doesn't matter if you defend yourself or if you fight back, or if you don't defend yourself. Yeah. It's just, Carl lives or Carl dies, and then that just affects like what happens in one scene later that you also don't get any choice in.
Yeah, you could sleep in 3 places as Kara, except for pretty much all of them are just going to bed, except for one has like an actual interesting like a crazy rat guy.
One is batshit crazy,
and that's supposed to be the bad one. It's like, oh, you made the risky choice. You're risking Alice's life with crazy rat guy.
Yeah, but if you want to sleep in the motel, you have to like rob multiple people. Like, the right answer basically is sleep in the car. It's the least amount of effort, and it has the same basic outcome of anything else.
Yeah,
except you don't have to deal with like a rat guy, and you don't have to rob anybody. You could just go sleep in a car.
And everything is objectively slow to play. Like, it's just everything. So it literally feels like this whole game feels like you're on a highway in stop-go traffic. And constantly you see exits, but all the exits are closed roads.
Yes. And you think, exactly. No, that's a really good analogy, because it seems like there's obvious ways out, but none of them are available.
Yeah,
you just have to keep going down the paths that are laid out for you.
And that path is bad. It's just an unfun path.
Unbelievably boring.
So, like, we're finally starting kind of what Marcus's whole point is supposed to be. Because you show up in this stupid tanker, and when you find the group of Jericho, and they're just all like, we're robots who ran away from your master. Marcus is like, how about we just steal body parts to heal the broken people? And everyone's like, you're our leader! And then they go on a fucking heist. And if you literally look at the timestamps in the fucking chapter select, upon 3 hours of meeting Marcus, he has organized them on a dangerous heist of parts, and they're all just like, Marcus is in charge! Robot revolution!
Yeah.
And like, they literally were just standing in the cold, even though it doesn't seem to matter that it's cold, but they keep lighting barrels to keep warm. Doesn't make any sense, nothing's consistent.
That's a good point.
Barrels just being like, we're just robots, we got nowhere to go, got nothing to do. And then Marcus is like, how about you do something? And everyone's like,
what?
Finally, someone with free will who uses it.
It literally is. It's insane because they're all just sitting around in Jericho, and one of them can die in your arms. They're just rotting in the bottom of the ship, and for some reason, people are sending other robots here, and they're just like, I don't know, we don't want to go out and risk our lives. We'd rather just die here. And Marcus is like, we could just go steal parts, and they're like, what? And so you do that, right? But before that, you meet the wise old like voodoo seer woman, who is
they make her fucking little wires look like dreadlocks.
Yeah, so she's like another black character, but she's all fucked up, and there's like the back of her head is missing. There's like wires coming out, and it looks like dreadlocks. And she's got a very like voodoo woman vibe to her, right? Like if you've seen like Pirates of the Caribbean, right? She's like that. And she literally talks to Marcus and is like, you fell from heaven and you've seen hell and now you're here and you have a great destiny. She literally just talks like that. And none of it means anything. I mean, she's not detailing. She's just telling you the overall plot of the game, which is Marcus had a good life and then he got shot and now he's going to be a leader, but it doesn't mean anything because he's doing that anyway. She doesn't give him advice. She's just there to be a stereotype and like a racist stereotype.
And then the other thing too about Marcus in this whole game is since they decided to make all the events take place in literally 6 days, Marcus just had like kind of a bad 12 hours.
Yeah.
And then he's like hanging out with all of his robots friends starting a revolution, and it's like, oh, he had to go through hell, and it's just like, I mean, kind of like he felt no pain and just crawled through a thing and like immediately healed it. Like, really that bad? He just is not with his old pal anymore.
So they go on this raid after like 3 hours of meeting.
Yeah.
He just shows up. He gets told he's going to be a leader by the voodoo woman, and then they're like, "I guess you're our leader now. Let's go steal parts." And this is the point where Marcus realizes he has Jesus powers. They're stealing parts, and they're about to be caught. Like an android walks up, an android security guard, and they grab the android. And you have a choice to like kill him if you want to, or you just kind of hold him hostage. And I think most people just try to hold him hostage. Like why kill him? We're not violent at this point unless you've decided to go that route, I guess. But it really hasn't been presented as an option. And then another security guard comes up, and he's looking for his android, and he's like, where are you? And Marcus whispers into the android's ear. He's like, I need your help. And the android doesn't say anything. But he doesn't give their position away. And it turns out Marcus, when he touched him, gave him free will. Like, it's really weird.
Which is a hell of a thing for your robots to be able to do.
And also does not in any way jive with what we've seen so far about the ways androids are able to gain free will. Right? Like so far they've needed some powerful emotional catalyst. Which doesn't make a lot of sense, but now Marcus can just transmit it like a computer program. And he does it almost immediately, and no one comments on this. Everyone just accepts that Marcus is Android Jesus, and he literally walks up to like 2 pairs of androids, and he has this moment where he's like, why aren't you like us? Don't you want to be free? And then he touches their hands, and he makes them free. He just understands now that he has this power.
And every time you see someone become free, they just like drop what they're doing and just like kind of wander off.
No, they immediately join your cause, right? Like it's.
Well, there's earlier when there's like there's all these people on the street and there's like people jackhammering and you just touch them and they're like, oh, I guess I'm not a jackhammer guy now.
Yeah, I mean,
they walk up and just like go into the sunset.
They do stop what they're doing, but like they always stop what they're doing to do exactly what Marcus wants them to do. Marcus is like, you're free now. Just kidding. You work for me now. And they just do. And it's wild because like, I guess being free immediately gives you an idea of like what it means to be free, your personal ability to choose and things like that. You just become a revolutionary like instantaneously. It has revolutionary touch.
Yeah. And by revolutionary, more so you exactly follow the will of exactly one person.
Yeah. Only Marcus, because he's the only one that can make choices for Jericho.
It's one of those things that again is never internally consistent. Like, so first he's touching people and only Marcus is doing it. But then later he just does it with his eyes. But sometimes it seems like he can't do it with his eyes. And then also you're like, okay, well, it seems like it's a Marcus special power. But then Connor does it in one of the pathways.
Yeah.
And just like, can all robots do this?
But,
what is this?
But Connor does have to touch them, right? It's so inconsistent. Right? Because Marcus has to touch them at first, and then he can just sort of like wave at people and be like, you're free, like a weird Oprah show,
Yeah.
You have free will, and then later, Connor can also do it if you make Connor go deviant, and that's not explained either because nobody else can do it, or nobody else ever has.
Maybe someone else can do it. The game just doesn't explain itself.
I mean, kind of. When you do it with Connor, you awaken like a bunch of androids. You're literally like in a factory of androids, and there's thousands of them there, and
they all lick each other.
Yeah, that's the point. Like, he touches one, and then they all touch each other like it's being transmitted like a computer virus. That's bad. That doesn't seem like a good way to establish free will.
Seems super dangerous.
It seems like you're establishing free will as like a malfunctioning of programming.
They literally explain it like that once. They say it's literally a glitch in the programming, which seems...
Yeah, but that seems derogatory at the time. Like, they're saying it in a way that's supposed to be like, it's only a glitch in programming.
But like, how could that possibly happen, right? Where you're just like... Oh, did you, when you're doing the programming, you left spaces because otherwise the program gets confused. Oh, what's the worst that could happen? Oh no, the robots learned free will and took over Detroit.
Oh no. It doesn't bear thinking about, really. Yeah. It's so wildly inconsistent, and it's impossible that you play this game and don't notice it. It's out of the blue. Marcus just touches people and they become free, and it is unexplained and goes uncommented on for the entirety of the game.
And so this is the beginning of another mechanic they introduced with Marcus. Again, all the mechanics are really simple, but you're constantly presented with being kind of violent or being violent or being pacifist.
Yeah.
And there's two characters. There's Josh, who is real wants you to be, pacifist. He thinks people won't listen to you if you're violent. And there's North, who's the hot girl who you can date, who is real horny for fucking violence.
Yeah, she is the violence woman.
Like every time you're just like, we can save his life, she's like,
yeah. And when you're talking about his life, you mean the third character who is completely neutral and exists to take bullets for you.
Yeah.
Simon.
Is it Simon? We just kept calling him a different name every time we saw him.
Well, we
said it on Greg for a while.
Yeah, he's so vanilla. We forget his name occasionally, and it doesn't matter. Simon's pointless. He's just there to take bullets for you.
There's a lot of characters who are like that. One of the most offensive things is later, this character you meet in this goddamn haunted mansion, who is a android, but also like a 50-foot tall black guy. You know what I mean? Like just purposely the hugest character in the game. And it's kind of like the offensive, like, I'm a giant black guy, but I have a heart of gold. I'm just really nice. And it's just that kind of like negative stereotype. I call it like, it's like the Green Mile.
Yeah, it's the Green Mile.
And it's already kind of feels kind of cringy when he shows up. But then he follows you around, and the way he functions in game is every time Kara would die, Luther can take that. So every screw up you make up with Kara that could lead to death, Luther is an extra life.
Yeah.
And, like, that's super fucked up.
And he has no other function in the game. So Luther joins your band and is supposed to be like the father figure to Kara's mother, Alice's daughter, right? But he doesn't really have any lines, and he doesn't do anything. And if he dies, because he can die in multiple spots, the lines he would have had are just given to another character.
Yeah.
Because he is irrelevant as a character. He's just there, literally, to take a bullet for you when you need him to. There's a couple of androids that do that. There's at least 3 that I can think of. But Luther is the most egregious because he's already an offensive stereotype. And then on top of that, they literally make him a meat shield. And I think the first place he can die is getting shot by a cop.
Yeah.
The second black person, well, there's a lot, I guess, when you consider the police violence on the streets in the game. But like in a home, the second black man to be shot dead by a cop. And it's just done without irony or commentary or anything. It's sad and it's racist and it's offensive, like deeply so.
And to get to him in the first place is such a bizarrely, weirdly written thing. Where earlier when you're trying to find a place to stay, the little girl Alice will like forcibly go to the bus stop to sit down. You have to go to her to continue going. And then you walk over there and a random android goes, you should go here, and like tells you the coordinates into your brain or whatever.
Yeah.
And then it's just a haunted mansion. And it's just like, that is how you, like, because you show up to a haunted mansion and you're like, why am I here?
Yeah, you thought you were going to Jericho because Jericho's been established at this point. But it turns out you're going to this mansion owned by this guy Zlatko. And Zlatko basically like takes in androids that are trying to flee for their life because I guess android sentience is just a thing that's been happening, even though it really hasn't been established.
Yeah.
I'm
busy 4 days.
Yeah, I don't think it's been that long yet.
This is the second day.
I think it's day 2.
Yeah, I think it's day 2.
And Zlatko basically he's like, yeah, I'll help you get across the border. And then he takes them downstairs and wipes their memory and then takes them apart and reassembles them like dolls, like he's Sid from Toy Story. He's just reassembling them into like shambling horrors in his basement. And again, this feels out of place.
Yeah, it's that backwards writing where he just wants to do horror crap.
Yeah.
So he just wrote horror crap. And he's just so diabolical. You know what I mean?
Insane. But yeah, he's going to wipe Kara's memory and Luther, like he leaves and Luther's like, meet me in the living room. And you break out as Kara and you go find Luther and he goes, I can't help you. And you're like, what? And so you go through the house, you find Alice, and you have this weird scene where Zlatko like hunts you through the house.
Yeah, it's like a bad chase sequence.
Yeah, and then you get outside and Zlatko's like hot on your heels, And then Luther steps up and like takes the gun from Zlatko and just shoots him.
Well, there's two ways.
Yeah.
You can release all the robot freaks, and then they just stop him.
Yeah, they literally like tear him apart.
And so we did that the first time, and we're like, well, that's what everyone does, because there's just a door, and they're like, do you want to open the door? You're like, yeah, I'm going to open the door.
Yeah.
And that's usually what happens. They're like, what happens if you don't open up the
cage?
And then he just, like, graphically shoots him. It's like, actually looks really out of place.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, like, oh, Luther's on your side, except for, like, definitely fucked up Alice.
Yeah.
You know? Like, no, he's friendly. He's like, I just saw him murder a guy. I've never seen someone murder, except for my dad yesterday. It's been a stressful couple of hours.
But also, Luther says he gains sentience when you're in the basement. Zlatko walks away and he's like, I saw your plight and I gained sentience. And that's when I told you to come meet me in the living room. And then you go meet him and he's like, I can't help you. And you're like, what do you mean you can't help me?
Yeah.
You said to come talk to you. And then you get outside and he's like, I guess I can't help you. And he just murders Zlatko and you go on your merry way. Luther's the dad now. And that's the last story significance he has for the rest of the game. Because every other scene is he has a chance to take a bullet for you. He's just a meat shield.
And then the next Kerosene is also just a weird fucking horror trope. It's a scene that just starts off with a bunch of nothing, and it's like snowing, and you find a shelter in the abandoned amusement park, and it's just kind of downtime, and then a bunch of frostbitten robots in the amusement park all break in, and like one of the options is like pull the gun out of the bag, and you know, it's supposed to be like this tense scene. Turns out, there's a friendly group of Jerrys.
Yeah, they're just Jerry's. You know, like from Rick and Morty.
Yeah, and they act like it too. They're just like lovable and dumb, and they're just like, we have a merry-go-round, come on. And they're just like, it's like a horror scene that just starts off being all creepy, and then it just ends with Alice on a fucking merry-go-round.
Yeah,
like,
but it literally, like, to get into the room, they like shattering windows and kicking down doors and stuff.
Like
it is terrifying, right? And you saw Jerry before, and he was like, it was creepy as hell because you activate him, and he's like, welcome to the amusement park, welcome to the amusement park. Right?
He's saying something like you'll have like a whale of a time, like a really cheesy,
yeah.
You know.
But he keeps breaking down,
crap.
so you just see like these like zombie monsters coming in. And you take out your gun and you like shoot it in the air, and they're like, oh gee golly gosh, I'm sorry, did we scare you? Can we take your kid over to the amusement ride? And it's just like, what?
And then Jerrys are just kind of around the rest of the game to be used to sacrifice for Alice.
Jerry's are the third meat shield. So you've got Simon and Luther and Jerry's, who after you meet them exist to take bullets for you.
And there's like 3 different times an option comes up that says sacrifice a Jerry.
An option I'll always take. I hate the Jerrys.
Yeah, and there's no reason not to, because like there's a bunch of them and they just keep showing up, and there's never like a Jerry like dealing with his sacrifice, you know what I mean? It's just like, free Jerry.
Yeah. It's a get out of Jerry free card.
And there's no way to interact with the Jerrys in that scene other than go to the merry-go-round. There's no just start killing Jerrys, like something interesting. It's like, no, they're gonna show up. You're going to be scared, and then it's going to be a fucking red herring.
And this whole scene, I think, is also a really good way of talking about, like, the different choice options in the game. Because a lot of people talk about this game like, oh my god, there's so many choices you can make, right? But up to this point, there's really not. You're pretty much on a line, no matter what you do. And there's a point where you're sitting with Alice, and it's like, she wants you to read her a story. Not read, but you tell her a story. The options that pop up are like talk about a unicorn or talk about a knight or something like that.
Yeah, like a princess.
Yeah,
and
I
think it's unicorn knight.
Yeah, and I was like, you know what? Alice is a little girl, and I'm tired of this like weird gender role trope they have going on through this whole game. I'm going to talk about the knight, and I clicked the knight button, and it literally was the first time I had said openly, I as the player am honestly making a choice here. I want something to happen, and Alice literally goes, no, not that one.
Yeah.
And you have to tell her some other story. And what we find out, because after the end of every chapter, it hard cuts to like a flow chart of all the decisions you can make. We find out none of those things had any meaning. No matter what I picked, she goes, not that one. And then you have to tell her a story that's like about you and Luther and her journey.
It's also like really frustrating because like as we were slogging through this game, every once in a while I'd be like, I'm actually excited to see how this choice turns out. And every time we did that, it ended up not being a choice.
Yeah.
You would do the choice and I'd be like, okay. And the scene was just over. And you're like, oh, I guess there's no payoff for that. Or it was just, okay, it's actually the same. Like, it just railroaded you to the path that we already saw last time.
Yeah, and if there are other options, it's, like, very minorly different from what you would see before, you know? And it's just, like, you look on the flowchart, and all it says is, read Alice's story. It doesn't even care what the options were. It's just, no, you have to do that.
And this brings us to the elephant in the room with Kara's story. Because the whole game, you're taking care of this little girl. And at some point, when you get to Jericho, you find out she's been a robot the whole time.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any fucking sense. Is she just pretending to need to survive? She knows she's a robot.
Yeah.
And why is her LED thing not there? Everyone has little LED things in their head. And you watch characters pull them out. You never see Alice do that.
No. Alice just never has one. And you don't know if she's deviant, like if she has sentience or not. It's not clear. She's just a robot. And for some reason, Kara just doesn't know. And the whole time, Luther's like trying to tell you, but every time he's like, Kara, I really need to talk to you about Alice. Kara's like, not right now. And she just does something else, but it's all arbitrary and pointless.
Also demonstrating how just little they fucking care about Luther.
Yeah, Luther can never tell you.
And it's like, why does this robot even fucking exist? Who's making, like, it's literally like a toy for adults where it's like, do you want a shivering, crying baby? You know? That's real fun. And it's always one age, because that's how making a robot works. Do you, like, 5 years later go like, I'm going to buy an older one and throw out this Alice? Like,
yeah.
What? Are you just planning to have a 10-year-old girl, like,
forever?
as your child for, like, it just doesn't make any sense.
Or until you get tired of her?
Yeah.
You know? Like, why are they making robot children? Yeah, let that question hang in the air.
Yeah.
So, it's a horrible, horrible thing to imagine, and I don't want to speculate on it.
And it's one of those things. It's like it's a Shyamalanian, like, oh, I wanted to twist to have a twist.
Yeah,
it
what
just
a twist!
Doesn't make any fucking sense.
Yeah,
and it just undercuts everything that you were doing, and it makes Kara fundamentally less interesting.
Yeah,
because she would be more interesting if she was taking care of a human in that relationship.
Yeah, because that's the point of the game, right?
Yeah. You could even have something like her rubbing off on Kara and giving her more, like, understanding human emotion better. Yeah. Or just, you know, any sort of context, nuance, themes in the game. But instead, she's just a rock that impedes you on your journey and forces you to constantly take care of her, which is just finding shelter and then undressing her a lot. I don't know why that keeps happening.
Super awkward. There's a lot of commands that are like, undress Alice, and you're just like, I'd rather not.
And this leads to another example of, I was excited about a choice that didn't matter fucking all. You can be distant with Alice. She'll be like, is everything going to be okay? And you can be like, no. And then she'll go down, you know? And it's very odd. Like, the only way to make Alice distant is if you're actively trying to do it. And then when you find out she's a robot, you can go towards her and sit next to her, and you can either be, like, accepting and hug her, or be distant. And if you're distant at that moment, and we're already distant during the game, she will get up and walk away. And then later, when there's Kara starts up again, it says, do you want to search for Alice? And if you don't, Kara does not have a cutscene for the rest of the game. If Alice leaves, Kara is functionally dead.
Yeah.
Which I think is super offensive, because it's a character who literally is entirely defined by being a mother. And it's also just like the one-woman robot is just like a maid/baby take care of her. And if you lose the baby side, she loses all purpose for you, the audience, even caring about her.
Yeah.
Like, it's just coded in a super negative and not positive way. And I actually wanted to see what would happen with Kara without Alice.
I was so excited to get rid of Alice when we finally found that choice. And then it just turns out Kara just disappears from the game at that point. You could do the rest of her scenes without Alice.
But they have to like animate them, and they're not going to do that.
Yeah, they're not gonna spend the time. And that's basically.
I guess Luther's just like, oh, she just left. Where did they go?
Yeah,
Luther's just like sitting in Jericho, being like, anyone want to be my friend?
Yeah. So basically, all these characters get together eventually at Jericho. Marcus is doing various heists. They go to like a radio tower at some point. A broadcast center, and they like take it over and broadcast their manifesto. And that whole part is, I'd love to talk about every scene in this game. They're all awful in unique and interesting ways. We don't have time for it all.
Yeah.
But they broadcast their manifesto to the world. They're like, we're robots. We want freedom. You get to pick a bunch of options. They're all the same. Kara goes through a bunch of like nightmare shit and ends up at Jericho, which like is now like an underground railroad. We didn't talk about it. She goes to Rose's house, who's basically a Harriet Tubman character. She's just this like nice black lady who's like our people went through a similar problem.
They also say racism in the past tense.
Yeah,
which is super fucked up. Also, this game's only 20 years in the future.
Yeah.
So sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they kind of imply that racism is like done in the world, but obviously not. It's but she's like the Harriet Tubman. She's ferrying robots to Canada, and she's doing that through Jericho, which has only existed now for like 3 days, so I'm not really sure how that's happening. And then Hank and Connor are doing a bunch of police investigations, just sort of various ones.
Yeah, every time a deviant shows up, they have to investigate and then try to figure out why they went deviant. And
it's super weird because we don't know what their job is. They have like the generic, like angry black chief of the force.
Yeah, I'm getting too old for this.
Yeah, it's really a Die Hard trope, and he's just like, you've got 24 hours to solve the case or you're out of here. But we don't even know what the case is, and it's very weird that they're investigating androids with an android sent specifically by CyberLife, the only company who has a motive for them to like not be successful in investigation.
Yeah.
It's super, like, Connor's out of place in this game. Despite being the most interesting character, he's out of place. And so they're going through like various investigations. One of them in particular, I think, is really offensive that I think you want to talk about.
Oh, yeah. So, here's a part where you go to a sex club because it wouldn't be cagey.
An android sex club.
An android sex club, because every single thing in this game has to just have the word android after it, so it can be about the theme, but that's not really being about the theme. We don't actually say anything about your themes. Also, it's actually doubly offensive chapter, because it starts with you show up and Hank got real drunk and playing Russian roulette.
With himself, yeah. That's like one of the most playful scenes like Connor has with Hank. Yeah.
He's like kind of jovial about the attempted suicide.
It's super buddy copy. They're like, he like puts Hank in the shower and turns it on, and Hank's like, you know,
son of a bitch.
But also Hank has a crippling drinking problem and is suicidal.
Yeah. Like, it's just, they treat like the drinking problem in the suicide as kind of just like, oh, Hank, what a loose kid. he never got over the death of his son and might put a bullet in his head. You're like,
what a madcap character.
Yeah, oh, Hank, indeed. and then you go to a fucking strip club, and like, again,
that's how you get him there. Hank's like, I ain't gonna do it, and he's like, there was a murder at the local sex club, and Hank's like, sex club, you say?
Yeah, local sex club, you say? Let's try this whiskey dick out, you know? But again, it would kind of make sense in this world if they had, like, all the androids you see are, like, Asian robots, and it's like, I get that, like, okay, this is a fetish club, they would do weird fetish stuff, but it just feels another offensive thing where you think, you know, fetishizing Asian women.
Yeah, like,
you could say, well, the club is fetishizing the Asian woman, David Cage isn't. And that's the idea is, a club would fetishize an Asian woman. But also, David Cage is clearly fetishizing this Asian woman because that's how he makes, like, he has a track record.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, there is a variety of choices in the sex club. But at the same time, even in this game, David Cage clearly doesn't have a good track record with dealing with, like, minority issues and problems of civil rights and things like that. You know,
he has a smoking bigot gun.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, even though I think it's something I would let go of in another game, but yeah, in this game I won't.
Yeah, he doesn't get the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
And like, again, it's just the robots on the walls. It's just, and they use a lot of the same models a lot, which would make sense because whatever. But like this one Asian one is the vast majority of them. And another one you see is North, who is can be the one love interest in the game. For Marcus, also kind of fucked up. You need the one love interest, a sex robot.
Yeah, she doesn't talk about her past, but it's the only other. Well, we see one other North, but it's unclear what she does. But this one, we clearly see North as a sex robot, that would be interesting to explore as a character. She's clearly like been hurt when you talk to her, and she doesn't talk about her past, and it'd be interesting to explore that as you got closer to her. She's like, well, I used to be a sex robot, and that, you know, that's fucked me up now that I've gained sentience. But that doesn't happen.
But you do this whole stupid investigation where the culmination of it is like lesbian robots who are on the run, who are in love. And it's just one of those things that feels like social currency again. It's like, oh, I put lesbian robots.
Yeah.
I'm progressive. And we were reading a David Cage quote that
oh my God.
When someone was, called him out being like...
Yeah, so there was some allegation against his company. And at some point, somebody had accused him of like homophobia and racism. And there's a quote he gave, and he's like, homophobic? I worked with Elliot Page. I can't be homophobic. Racist? I worked with Jesse Williams, who does a bunch of civil rights stuff. I can't be racist. Judge me by my work. Those are the words he used. And like he's like, I have a gay friend. I can't be homophobic. I have a black friend. And they're not even friends. They're just people he's worked with in the past and has a sketchy fucking record with. And if we do as he asks and judge him by his work, including this game, has a tragic track record. As I think we've discussed extensively at this point.
Anyone who responds to a sexist or racism allegation with irate defenses and just referring to your employment history, that's like what fucking billionaires do. You know what I mean? Like that's the shit you hear from like the commissioner of football or something. You know what I mean? Of just like, how can I be that? I did this, and it's like, yeah, it's just the playbook of someone who, like, that so thoroughly entrenches in my mind that he's obviously just, like, a bigot and racist guy. You know? More so than even just kind of, like, because a lot of stuff we're saying is just, like, this just could be general ignorance, haven't really explored, has never had, like, a critical thought about race, you know?
Yeah.
But it literally comes off as even more malicious in contexts like that.
And to put this back in the context where we started, there are these two lesbian robots, both named Tracy. They're called the Tracys. And you're there to investigate the death of a patron, a man, and he was strangled to death. And basically, you have a fight with the Tracys, and you find out what happened. One of them was like, I saw the man strangling Tracy, right? And I guess robots can be strangled. So he's strangling her. And she loses her mind, flips out, and basically kills him, and the Tracys try to run away together. You can kill both of them because you have a fight, and then you get a gun, and you could shoot them.
You kill one of them.
Sorry, you kill one of them, right? If you kill one of them, the other one gives a 5-minute monologue about how they were in love and everything that happened, and then she shoots herself in the head. Or you can just let them go.
Yeah,
it's an option I prefer, obviously, but like also in the heat of just a fight, and you pull out your gun, you're probably just gonna pull the trigger as a player.
Yeah,
right? That's just what you're trained to do, generally speaking. So like, it's weird that they do that. But let's judge David Cage by his work. He puts the only lesbian couple in his game, I guess the only gay couple in general, and submits one of them to sexual violence. And even though it's a robot, right? It doesn't really matter because it's a female robot and it's being perpetrated by a human male. And like, even though it's a robot, you still have that level of empathy. That's like, this is a woman, right? That's why you're there, because you treat them like a woman you want to have sex with. But apparently, when this man has sex with women, he strangles them so hard he kills them. So like, we have a woman who is characterized by like the sexual violence done against her, and then you can murder both of them in the infamous, bare your gaze trope. So if we want to judge David Cage by his work in this particular case, he doesn't come out very well, does he?
Yeah. We've had, in one chapter, disregarding alcoholism and suicide in a jovial manner, Asian fetishization, the pointing out that one of the only love interest is a sex robot, violence against, queer people, and it's like, it's just a single chapter, just jam-packed with just, like, you can't do this much stuff on accident.
Yeah, it honestly feels incredible, the amount of offensive violence that was packed into this chapter.
Yeah, and all of it doesn't add anything. I mean, like, in general, effective tropes don't add something, but what I'm saying is, like, there wasn't even, like, a point. There's no intentionality focused when they did these images. They were just, to him, evocative. It's just like,
exactly.
Ooh, a lesbian robot.
Yeah, ooh, you can kill them, but if you kill them, you find out they're a lesbian and in love and just trying to get away. And it's
like, ooh, all these naked women. I'm having a good time.
Yeah. It's just, It's so much in that chapter. Ugh.
There's been a ton of time talking about, honestly, the best part of the game, which is Hank and Connor.
Yeah, far and away.
All the non-playable characters in the game that you're around a lot kind of have like little bars on how much they like you. And usually it only matters for exactly one scene at one point in the game if the bar is either at the max or the lowest. And it's usually just a clearly mechanical thing that you manipulate, but you never care. Like, if you piss off Alice, you never care. But, like, Hank is the one character, when he approves of a thing that you do, you feel good about it.
Yeah.
Like, as the player. You're like, oh, I made Hank happy and I like it.
Because Hank is well acted, and I shudder to say well written, but he is a compelling character in and of himself.
He's well written in the same way, if you could say, like, a buddy cop thing as well.
Yeah.
But it's a fun, like, buddy cop things are fun, where it's just like...
Yeah, his dynamic with Connor is fun.
The whole, like, I don't like you. It's like, actually, we're friends now.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's fun early when they're not friends, and he's just, like, getting a beer and grabbing a hot dog, and Connor's just being so annoying. Right? Like, there's a lot of just, like, him being like, wait the car. And then you, like, and then it'll, like, on the screen will say something like, your main objective is from Cyberlife, and they don't want you to stay in the car. And so you just walk out, and it's just like, Jesus Christ, man. Like, it just has, like, a good feel and vibe. And then this is how the game tries to guide you down towards being a deviant. Because if you're close with Hank, that will almost definitely make your software more unstable, which means you're more likely to become a deviant or a human.
Hank hates androids, and the less android you are, the more human you become, you might say, the more Hank likes you. And it actually works really well, because it is exactly what you expect from a buddy cop movie. Right? Like, you gain a little more humanity, and you pull Hank back from the breach, and you're, like, at the, friends at the end.
The first time you see Connor, actually, is, like, the opening scene of the game, is actually before Hank is involved at all. And there's, like, a couple of interesting things that, like, allow you to, like, think about Connor going into the relationship with Hank. So, like, basically, there's a hostage situation, Robot has a little girl, you have to stop it, and it introduces you to all the mechanics. Now, there's two things I think are interesting. One, the guy who's there, the cop. The cop who's running the thing. You ask him for information, and he's basically just so, like, fix it or don't fix it, basically. I'm not, like...
Yeah, he stonewalls you.
Yeah, like, he stonewalls you. Just doesn't trust an android, and it makes sense. Like, one of the first things you see is a woman being like, they said an android? Why the fuck did they said an android? Because a different android has a gun to a girl.
Yeah.
And you're like, is this really the best way to negotiate? And, like, you, the audience, actually are forced to consider it. And you also see a very robotic Connor at this point. He's, like, flipping a coin between his fingers in the elevator in a way that is impossible. But it's also interesting because, like, why would he be doing that? It's, like, a trick thing. So it has, like, I think it has two sides where it, like...
Two sides of a coin?
Gonna cut that. Probably not.
No, we're not.
But you see the flare that feels human, but, you see him being robotic. And I think one of the best things we actually did in this game is actually the first decision you can make is there's a little fish on the ground. He's flopping from, like, an aquarium. And you can pick him up, and you can put him in the fish pond. And if you do that, your software becomes more unstable. Because you have no reason to save that fish. That's not your mission.
Yeah.
And just showing that compassion is part of that mechanic. I think it's really interesting. The opening sequence has some cool stuff, albeit you actually don't need to gather any evidence. You can just walk out there and solve the mission yourself.
Yeah. Well, I do think it's a really good chapter, but it doesn't really bear talking about.
When you play Connor, I think the player is naturally thinking about being more human or more robot, and they make that choice.
Yeah.
The game clearly wants you to be more human, because every time you do a more robot thing, you get, like, worse scenes and worse dialogues and things get cut off.
And Hank doesn't like you.
And Hank doesn't like you, and his scenes are less fun, because it's funner when Hank is kind of, jovial. But there's a good climax of this kind of early in the game, where Hank is, like, this is right at the beginning of kind of Hank is, like, you've at least moved his like or hate meter in a certain direction at this point, where you talk to him on a bridge at midnight, and if you piss him off, he kills you. Yeah. He knows you're going to get resurrected, right? He just shoots you, and then you come back the next day, and it's just him taking out his frustration. And it's just, like, it's just kind of an interesting and good payoff for kind of, like, what that, like, the relationship Hank and Connor have.
Yeah.
Right?
Because Hank is really questioning what you are. Like, you're investigating all these deviants, and he's just like, what the fuck are you? What happens if I shoot you in the face right now? And Connor's just, there's a lot of things you could say. You know, he's like, would you even feel it? Would you even care? And as Connor, you could be like, no, I wouldn't, you know, or you can be like, you know, I'll just upload and be another robot tomorrow, you know, or you could say things that are like, you know, semi-meaningful or emotional.
I think the scene is good too because it shows you why people would be violent to robots. Like, you get why Hank is being violent because he's like, well, it doesn't even matter. Like, if I shoot you, what even changes? And it kind of makes you question, like, why are the robots upset by this in the first place? Because Connor, as a non-sentient robot, doesn't seem to care. He's never like, please don't shoot me.
Yeah, exactly. He doesn't care, and it's weird that everybody else ends up caring.
Yeah, that's just a theme they could explore, you know, later on.
Well, they do explore it later. So, eventually you get to Kamsky's house. And Kamsky is the CEO. He created CyberLife. He created what they call the first robot to ever pass the Turing test. And I was gonna talk a lot about the Turing test, but we don't really have too much time to get into it. Basically, it's not really a test that measures if something is like human or conscious. It was a philosophical treatise on the philosophy of mind, what it means to be conscious. But the Turing test as is not really a thing. It's more of a thing now where they just kind of test like robot AIs and they judge them on how believable they are. But that's not really a metric for, you know, if something is conscious or you know, free in any sense. But David Cage has never read philosophy in his life, so he's just like, oh, I made the first robot that passed the Turing test, and it's this Chloe robot. And Chloe's actually the face that's on your home screen in the game. When you first boot it up, she talks to you and says a bunch of nonsense, and mostly looks confused the entire game. Just like long periods of her face just looking really confused, which doesn't go over well. And it's because she's supposed to be gaining deviancy too, but, you know, it's not really apparent. But Kamsky is just this super Silicon Valley. He lives in like an ultra modern house, like in the friggin' Arctic or something, just out in the snow by himself with like 3 Chloe robots, 2 of which I think are permanently in the pool. And it's super creepy because it's just this guy living with like 3 female robots that just service him.
Also explicitly like Aryan women, which is like kind of uncomfortable.
Yeah, like straight up blonde hair, blue eyes, like really, really weird, really creepy as hell. And Kamsky's this super arrogant guy, and he's like, well, I made the first robot that passed the Turing test. I have something called the Kamsky test. The Turing test, actually, I gotta talk a little. It goes out of its way to separate the interpreter, the person that's like receiving the signals, from like seeing what the person they're talking to looks like or sounds like or anything like that, because it's supposed to be a guessing game, right? You're supposed to be able to tell whether or not the thing you're talking to is a robot, and you would be able to tell by sight or something like that. So it goes out of its way to control for these things so that only like a pure concept of like freedom and consciousness will come through the other side. The Kamsky test involves taking a human-looking woman and making her kneel in front of you, and he puts a gun in your hand and tells you to shoot her directly in the face like a mafia execution. And if you do it, if you shoot her, you're a robot because you have no empathy. He's like, the Kamsky test measures empathy by making you shoot a human woman in the face. Like, come on, Kamsky. You know? Come on, David Cage. Do it.
I hate the whole Kamsky shit because he just looks like the world's stupidest jabroni. Like, they just give him they just make him look like...
It's got like a man bun and everything.
It's like a punchable face. Like, it's purposely
He's a
like
super punchable face.
That idea. But, like, it's just there. It's like the backwards writing crap, where, like, he had this image where it's like, oh, will you shoot this blonde woman? And it's another woman who just has no control over anything in her surroundings.
Yeah. And we get to commit violence against her.
Yeah, and it's just kind of like also transparently like part of the deviancy scale. I just feel like it's a measurement stick, right? Well, at this point, we're getting close to the decision tree where you have to be deviant or not. Do you want to be a robot or do you want to be a human? And the game is just telling you, like, this is a clear way to tip the scale a lot.
Yeah.
Either way.
And frankly, like, the deviancy tree for Connor is very similar to, like, a morality tree you would find in another game. Most of the choices you make that are, like, supposedly good or the right choice are the deviant choices.
And if you're, like, trying to explore the idea of what it is to have free will and consciousness and boiling it down to whether or not you would kill a robot, that looks like a human person. That's like the shallowest and dumbest way to explore this concept.
That should be the tagline of this game. The shallowest and dumbest way to explore this concept.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of times where you're faced with a choice and Hank's just there, like on the sidelines, being like, "Don't do it, Connor," and just like watching, like you can shoot the lesbian couple.
Yeah.
And if you do, Hank's like, "Jesus Christ, Connor, you can shoot this blonde woman." And he's like, "Jesus Christ, yeah, you just shoot a lot of women in this game."
Yeah,
Jesus.
yeah. We kind of hadn't considered that up to this point.
Fucking Marcus. So, Kara and fucking Connor all end up at the same place. And it's supposed to be like, okay, now they're intersecting in your trees. And this kind of like catapults into the end game, which is basically like 2 mega chapters. And it's pretty frustrating. If you boil down their endings to kind of the pathways you have, you can either be deviant with Connor, and then you help the Resistance, get their sentience. If you're not deviant with Connor, you basically have like 2.5 scenes of you just like killing the Resistance because you're good at your job.
Yeah, and so Marcus can also die in a few scenes. And if Marcus dies, North just takes over the Resistance. And instead of you ever playing North, it just plays like several of the scenes that were on the violence track for Marcus, except North is there. And you don't get to play her. It's just like a brief, 10-second cutscene of North like storming a street and like killing cops and stuff like that. And that's it. If Marcus dies, his story's over. But because he's the core of the game, North just plays out the rest of his scenes without your input. If Connor dies, it doesning matter.
And if North stays alive and you have evil Connor, they're going to also make you shoot North. Because it's a woman and Connor probably should just shoot them for no reason. And then another problematic thing with the Connor thing is if you have a bad relationship with Hank, he will just kill himself.
Yeah, Hank will just commit suicide, and there's nothing you can do about it, and it sucks.
And if you get to the end, if you do the other side with Connor, you actually get like one of the cooler looking scenes where you're in like a fucking room full of other Connors, and you're confronted by an evil Connor, and it's just like, it's just a good fun scene that you just don't get if you try one of the 2 options they give you. You're like, oh, you have options, except for one sucks.
Yeah, exactly. That's how this whole game feels. It's like, the game has a certain path it wants you to follow, and if you don't follow that, it may give you different scenes that some people will call choices, but those scenes will suck, and it will not feel like you completed the game.
Kara has 3 options at the end. She can cross the river to Canada. She can go through the bus, or she can get caught and go to a concentration camp. Yeah. Now, if you cross the river, Luther is guaranteed to die. I don't know why.
Yeah, so it's supposed to be like a safe haven for robots, but like they are patrolling the waters with gunboats that will just shoot any boat they see.
They just literally shoot 100 boats.
They won't check for survivors. They'll just open fire on the boat and assume everyone's dead and keep going. Luther will die no matter what.
If you go if you go to the bus station, which is supposed to be like the goodest ending because it's like the cleanest, you get to the security guy and they're checking to see temperature to see if you're a robot. If public opinion is good, which is only determined by mostly Marcus's revolution and if it's peaceful or not, he'll let you go by. Otherwise, you could throw a Jerry, a Luther. I think the son.
You can throw yourself. You can throw Kara at it. But basically, somebody's got to take a bullet so Alice can get across the border.
Yeah, and like honestly, like Jerry's and Luther's were designed to be expendable.
Yeah, that's their whole job, is their meat shields.
And then the last one is the concentration camp, which at least is the most has the most going on. Like at least it's the most visually interesting, but it's offensive as shit. That's a concentration camp in the first place.
It is absurd. So within a few days of this robot revolution, which has mostly just been people marching, the human government has constructed concentration camps and is shooting androids in the streets. It looks like a freaking apocalypse. It looks like a war, or as Marcus calls it at one point, a genocide, because it is.
So there's at least one interesting thing in the Holocaust bullshit. Is
it's hard to say there's at least one interesting thing in the Holocaust.
Yeah. They make them all, take their skin off, and now they all just look like they're plastic shells, and it's just like, it feels dehumanizing, right? Like, that's the point of it. But also, there's no reason to have concentration camps. They just shoot them in the street, It just doesn't make sense that that's how they're doing this.
Yeah, and it also seems like every android has just become deviant at this point, but it doesn't really make sense why that's happening.
It's insane to have a concentration camp pop up in a couple of days.
Yeah.
In a day.
Yeah.
Just a day. Like, possibly that night. I should check the timeline, but it might just be the night of the next day.
Yeah, no, it's super brutal. And Kara's 3 endings, like, she has a couple of different endings in the concentration camp, but it's mostly just you escape or you die.
Yeah, you either escape or die. If you escape, you go to the plastic heap, and you're just kind of like...
It's another android graveyard, but like you're alive, and maybe Alice, and maybe Luther if you sacrifice to Jerry instead.
It's quite literally the difference if you live or die in the concentration camp is either way, the last scene is you go to the plastic heap.
Yeah.
But if you're dead, you don't wake up.
Yeah, you're just dead.
But if you wake up, you're just like, you just wake up. That's the extent of it.
Yeah, so that's all of Kara's story, is she prevents a child from being murdered, then she goes through a bunch of horrors, and her story's over.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah. A haunted zombie mansion,
Yeah.
the Holocaust,
the Underground Railroad.
Yeah.
It sounds like a Fallout game.
Now, Marcus shit is what pisses me off the most. That's why I wanted to save it for last. You can go violent or peaceful. If you go violent, you just play a mini game.
You just shoot people.
You just shoot. And
But with David Cage controls, it's awful.
it works. Violence is the easier thing. North is more likely to want to fuck you. Just kidding. She'll always want to fuck you.
Yeah, that's never not an option.
If you go peaceful, one, it doesn't make sense you're not getting shot. There's so many times where, like, Marcus is just standing, like, in a fucking snowfield, and everyone's like, hold your fire, that's the leader. Why are we holding our fire? I don't know.
There's literally, everywhere you see is androids being killed in the streets, and you've got the android revolutionary leader marching down the street with like an army of androids at his back, and they're just like, shoot all around him, shoot every android not in front. And so, like, people are just dying left and right of you, but, like, you're fine and not defending yourself at all.
With this fucking plot armor. And then it gets to the point where they can, like, storm your position. You're surrounded by guards. And there were 4 options, but 2 of them are locked for us. But the 2 options we had were sacrifice, which turns out you just set yourself on fire, and then they kill everyone.
Yeah, apparently your sacrifice does not mean much, because they murder all of you.
Yeah, they literally just shoot everyone behind you. But again, it's another, like, shameless, like, stealing a thing from a culture of emulation. And the other option was sing. And no joke, when that showed up, this is the first time I ever shotgunned a beer. I walked to the kitchen, and I was just like, I just need to feel something. And they just sing, and then everyone's like, guess we're done with this stopping the robots. I don't know if they can sing.
Yeah. Oh, they can sing?
Why don't we get these guys with a mass singer?
They must be human after all. And then it cuts to the president on TV being like, well, turns out the robots are sentient, so we've decided to give them Detroit.
Yeah.
That actually happens. They're like, humans clear out, the Detroit is for robots now.
Like, imagine, this is a little on the nose, but like, imagine if you went to the Palestinians right now and be like, have you tried singing? Maybe they'll stop trying to murder you.
It really is just unbelievable. So the game always ends with like the president making some announcement based on public opinion. And it's like she can give you the city, or she can order like a genocide of all the robots. I think there's one where she nukes Detroit.
It never registers though, because it's just the president talking. And like, we had to beat the end of this game a lot. And like, it just glazes over every time. It's just so boring.
Yeah.
It doesn't really mean anything because you don't see these characters anymore. You don't see the fruits of what happens. Like, if they get nuked or die, it doesn't matter. The game's just like, and now you're done.
And there's like 100 different endings, but most of them aren't like particularly different from anything you've seen. It could be like minor differences, just generically like worse than what is essentially the peaceful ending, which is the good ending.
And like, none of the endings, no matter what you do, have a moment where you could like soak in the victory. You know what I mean? Like, every game kind of has, not every game.
It just kind of hard cuts to the credits.
Yeah, every time it cut to the credit, it was like, oh, it's just over? Like,
yeah.
It was shocking every time. You never, like, you do all this stuff with Kara. You just run through a horror gauntlet. And when you finally get somewhere safe, like, we're here now, and then ends.
Yeah.
And you don't get to feel, like, the relief that should come off of Alice and Kara.
Yeah,
right?
There's no resolution. There's no epilogue. It's just...
Yeah.
I guess we did it.
Yeah, you don't see a future, right, where the androids and the humans are are, acting differently to each other. We don't see a future for Hank and Connor, and, if they keep, I'd straight up be happy if they literally just said lines of text and, like, where are they now?
Yeah,
just anything.
Like a 90s sitcom or something. So that wraps up the characters. They have pretty messy endings, so does the rest of this. So I'm going to wrap up my thoughts here about what exactly bothers me about this game. First, I'm going to start with characters. Because the characters are inconsistent, not simply because they're poorly written, but because from one line of dialogue to another, you can be a completely different person. There's no consistency and there's no reason to be consistent across the whole game. So you can't say that Kara has a particular character, or that Connor, Marcus does, but he doesn't really have a character at all. He's just kind of the savior and just is that start to finish. Connor has a decent arc if you play exclusively his deviant role, but beyond that, you don't have to do that, and he doesn't have a character otherwise. And so you can't say this game really has good characters, because it doesn't really have characters at all. You can't say it has narrative, because you can have things with branching narratives where characters die and things like that, but their deaths have to mean something, and those characters have to live on in some way or another in the game. Whereas in this game, if they die, they just cease to exist. The game forgets about them and goes on about its day. It has a core storyline that it likes to push, right? And that's just the robot revolution, but that can happen with or without you. It doesn't really matter. And it's as much as you can say this game has a narrative. So, maybe a little. And then as far as gameplay goes, it basically doesn't have gameplay. The game will constantly wait for you to press whatever button is on the screen, unless it's like some QuickTime events, and then you can just fail those, and a character will probably die, and it will have little to no consequences, because nothing in this game actually matters. So it doesn't have characters, it doesn't have a narrative, and it doesn't have gameplay. So what do you have? Well, you have a spectacle, right? It's not even a movie, it's more like a circus performance. And, much like a real circus performance, whatever hope you have in your heart at the beginning is replaced by the end with the sad realization that the lions are underfed and the elephants are abused. All for an experience duller than expected that neither challenged nor informed your view of the world in any meaningful way.
And despite all of our rage, we're just trapped in a game made by David Cage. I'm just going to reiterate a little bit, because one of the last things you said was, none of it matters. And, that's the thing with this game, is nothing matters. Your choices don't matter, the characters don't matter, there's no themes. They reference the Holocaust, but it doesn't matter because it doesn't mean anything, right? Every little, going to the concentration camp crap, it doesn't fill you with an emotion, because it just seems arbitrary and weird and out of place, and everything takes you out of the game. You'll have literal scenes where a character will get shot in the face, and then that scene will end, and then the game will go, and then just show you a flowchart of all of the decisions you made and how most of them had no impact whatsoever on anything in the story.
Or that they all lead to the same place.
Yeah, and it pulls you out of it, because none of the scenes ever work, none of the scenes ever land, because every time you're doing a chase, you get to a doorknob, and then everyone freezes.
Time stops.
Yeah, time stops. And that constantly happens during any moment of tension, any scene. Whenever a scene has an emotional moment, instead of in Last of Us, where they would do a sharp cut and then make it sink in and linger with you, inside, this game will show you a completely mechanical flowchart on the mechanics of the game, or even go so far as sometimes the last thing in the game will happen, and it has no emotional impact, doesn't feel like the last scene in the game, and they'll just say, Detroit become human, and then unskippable credits show up. So they clearly think what they did was good, but they will never let any of their scenes flesh out and have life to them, Whenever you make a big decision as Marcus or Connor or Kara, you never have them sitting with it or contemplating it or kind of, more exploration of it later. It's just, okay, that scene's over, and then the next day you're at a fucking haunted mansion or something, you know?
Yeah, nothing seems to move together.
So lightning round?
Yeah, let's do lightning round. I'll start this one on the back of what you just said. Have you noticed that characters just sort of disappear between scenes?
Yeah, the Jerrys are just... So, a good example is, the Jerrys just kind of follow you, and the other one is the Harriet Tubman lady is just, slowly driving her car next to your adventure. She keeps being hey, I'm here now. If you don't kill Todd at the beginning, the dad of Alice that you kill as Kara, if you don't kill him, He just shows up at the end of the game and is just like, I was wrong. I've changed. And just like cries into you.
Yeah, he doesn't have a character arc. He just, at the end, he's like, I care now. I care. Yeah, no, I noticed it most in the scene with Marcus and Carl, the old white man who owned him. So between the two scenes where his tweaker son shows up, in the morning, his son shows up, and then the rest of their day, presumably, is spent at the house. Right? Just doing like painting and whatever normal things they do. Because at night, that tweaker son shows up again and they catch him in the painting room. They're like, oh, the lights are on. Somebody's broken in. But like, they've been here the whole time. It's a mansion, but we only see like 2 rooms. There's nowhere for them to go. Like, there's no way they missed this kid, right? But it's because they cease to exist between those scenes, right? Wait, they finished the first scene with the tweaker kid. They no longer exist. And then they start the second scene in a place where they see somebody's broken in. No, the connective tissue between the scenes doesn't exist.
I'm going to throw myself my own question because this one of the things that frustrates me so much that reminds me of. It's every single time they had to come up with a number for this game, they somehow picked the world's dumbest number. So it starts off early with unemployment at 38%. That's too high.
That's way high.
Right, it was like 20-something unemployment during the Great Depression.
Yeah.
And you're saying almost 40% of the workforce just doesn't, or 40% of the people are not a part of the workforce. You don't have a functioning economy. And so then you're like, okay, well, this is 20 years in the future and we have almost 40% unemployment. That makes no sense. Well, you're at a convenience store and you watch a guy walk up with a 6-pack of beer and chips and he spends less than $5 on it. Stuff doesn't get cheaper in the future, especially in a world with 39% unemployment. The other thing is, we looked at the timeline. They say the dates and the times at the beginning of the chapter select. And if you look at all of them, they just paint a picture of a world that makes no sense.
Yeah.
There's like one day where it's just Connor and Hank's day, where they go, it starts with, okay, he meets him at the bar the previous night, and then they do an investigation. They interrogate a guy at 1 a.m. You're like, okay, that's fine. But then the next day, they go on 3 separate investigations together. In the middle of it, Hank gets so drunk he tries to kill himself. And then later in that same day, after he sobers up, he shoots Connor in the head.
Yeah.
Or can. It's a possibility. It questions Connor's existence. Like, what a busy fucking day they had.
They met yesterday.
And all the time, the characters walking around, this is not really on the same point, but all the time, characters around Hank are just like, smells like booze when you walk. It's like, fire this guy. This is ridiculous. Yeah. And then one time, he pulls a gun on a different officer, and there's no, like, reprimanding.
Yeah, because that officer was like accosting Connor, who is a robot and expendable because Hank shoots you in the face at one point.
Yeah, later that day.
Yeah, literally later that day. But Hank, in your defense, pulls a gun on a fellow officer, and they're just like, "Oh, Hank,
yeah,
you're such a drunk,
a loose cannon.
Yeah, you're such a wild card. You could kill any one of us any day." I have a question. Is Alice deviant or not?
Well, you can't tell because everyone who's deviant also has no personality.
Yeah, and everybody that's a robot mostly just acts like a person anyway. So, like, what does deviancy really mean?
The game doesn't care to ask that question.
No. Yeah, that's a good point.
And so, I guess there's no answer to that. That, I can't get over. Like, the first time we played this game, which was actually kind of a while ago, and we got to Alice being a robot, we were, like, it was literally like, we just, like, no!
Yeah. It was miserable. Because it just means nothing.
Yeah, and like it's like you're just pretending to be cold, you're pretending to be hungry, like it is so obviously just there to like, oh, I got you. And it's like, yeah, I didn't think that was gonna happen because it's so stupid.
Yeah.
You didn't like pull one over on me, David Cage.
And before somebody adds me, I know that robots have like a cold sensor. Later you have the option, like Alice is saying she's cold, and you have the option to turn her cold sensor on and off, a decision that makes no difference no matter what you do. But androids have a different physiology. A cold sensor is what we call a thermometer. Saying you're cold implies that there's something like you have nerves and things that are being excited by the cold. Androids don't don't have that, right? Like, they're not susceptible to cold. We've seen androids in the cold. They don't really care. She doesn't feel cold in the way that a human feels cold, despite that, even if she was deviant.
There was that one frozen Jerry.
Yeah, but he didn't give a shit. All the other Jerrys were fine. They were frozen. My point is, like, Alice is gaslighting everybody. All right?
Yeah.
She's just pretending to be cold and pretending to be hungry and pretending to be tired, and she feels none of these things. But, like, that's why I don't know if she's deviant.
She knows she's the truest sense of the word deviant. She's just being a little bastard. She's like, get me food.
The other option is they programmed a child robot to just act needy and difficult all the time.
Yeah, it's a Furby. It's just the worst Furby ever.
Yeah.
Like, everyone's like, oh, this is cool. You can feed it. And you're like, but then you have one, and at 1 a.m. it goes, I'm hungry. And you're like, this is the worst invention man's ever made.
It's what were those little pocket things?
Tamagotchi.
Yeah, it's a Tamagotchi, right? Imagine what people would actually do with robot children in this world, because you don't really have to take care of it, right? Like, you're gonna find a dead child on your floor at some point because you forgot to take care of it.
That's the other thing. It's like, imagine wanting a Tamagotchi so bad that you're willing for everyone to be like, is that guy like a pedophile?
Yeah.
Like, he bought a child robot, and I can't imagine why, and it's prohibitively expensive.
How does a guy whose only personality is I do space crack on the couch afford robots for his family?
There's $3,000 and beer cost $5.
Yeah.
That's really expensive relative to the other goods and services we've seen.
And he's got to buy his space crack, you know?
Yeah, that can't be cheap. There was like a line like later on where they're like, the doctor failed the surgery because he was high on space crack. And you're just like, fuck off. You know what I mean?
That was Hank's son died. Yeah. And you thought like, you thought like, oh, maybe he died to a deviant or something, right? But like, no, he just got in a car crash, and then the doctor that operated on him was high on space crack at the time and just killed his son, which sort of defeats this whole thing that like Hank hates androids. Hank just hates androids for unrelated reasons.
Yeah.
You know? Has nothing to do with his son. That's just for funsies.
One thing that stands out a lot is there's all these dramatic scenes, and framed in the foreground is just like a Detroit sports thing. Like, it's a fake sports thing because they don't have the rights or whatever. But like, there's a part where you're climbing up a building and it's over a giant Detroit football thing. And when they're like marching, it's just like a guy, like in the foreground, a guy hitting a home run. And you're like, is this about something? Like, why are you doing this so often?
I was thinking about that because you do this at the broadcast tower. You like cut a hole in a window and you have to abseil up the building. I think that's the right word. Don't at me. But you climb up the building.
Actually, please at us. We need engagement.
Yes. I'm just kidding. Please
please
at me. Please at me.
I'd like to be cucked at Boyer.com.
Don't give them my personal email. But anyway, you're climbing the building and it's on this huge Jumbotron. And it's like the big Detroit D on there. But they wanted to make the D diegetic in the world. So instead of just like putting a D and letting it be sort of a metaphor for the game, they just have to make it a football team. So while you're climbing the thing, it's like the big D and you're like, the music is off the fucking charts right now. It just cuts to like you're climbing over footballers playing football. And you're like, what is going on? Yeah. This killed the mood. The mood was already weird, but like it kills it immediately.
So one time, the game says, do you want to use force or do a ruse? Turns out the ruse is you pull a gun on them and knock them unconscious. That's not what a ruse is.
I forgot about the ruse. It feels like a bit, right?
Yeah,
like it's a ruse. It's a ruse, right? You pull your gun out and point at him. It's a ruse. This is a ruse. You don't know. This gun could be fake. You don't know. Yeah. You don't know. It's a ruse. You don't know. It's a ruse.
Yeah, right. We screwed up the first time because it said we're gonna do a ruse because we're trying to keep public opinion up. And like pull out your gun. I'm like, that's not what a ruse is.
But that's the other option, right? Basically there's some security guards you have to get past, and you have two options, which is like use force or make a ruse. Use force is you just shoot them, right? Yeah. Like North does some karate moves and you shoot them all. So the ruse is just the same thing as use force. It's just one is technically the non-lethal option. Yeah.
there are goddamn magazines everywhere. And like at first, early in the game, it's like world building and it makes sense. Like you're doing this really boring trip to get paint, and you can like read a magazine about how robots are affecting sports,
the jobs,
just some world building. But then like later, it's like you're like a dirty tanker, and someone's just like, "Hey, a magazine about global warming," and you're like, "This is a weird."
Yeah, you just find the magazines like on the ground sometimes. Like there's people being murdered in front of you, and you're like, "Oh, there's a magazine over there," and that magazine is going to talk to you about like robot animals that they have. Like, what do you mean they have robot animals?
Why do they have robot animals? And the text is small, and they're all super boring. And again, it's just the whole thing is like whenever they come up with something, it just makes no sense. They're like, "Oh, there's a pitcher, a robot pitcher, who can throw 120 miles an hour." It's like, well, you wouldn't do that to your sport.
Yeah.
You broke your sport.
You just don't put androids. It's not the point of sports is to have it played by androids. You could have an android league, and that would be sick as shit. But you don't just mix androids in with the regular players and be like, "Oh yeah, that team's just real good now."
Yeah, you just have like a bunch of identical players too. Like everyone just have one pitcher who throws 120 and they never get tired, so you only use them.
Yeah, but then you'd have android batters that like hit perfectly every time.
Yeah. Which also brings up, why doesn't everyone have super strength in this game?
Yeah, it gets me so bad, right? Because they talk about androids taking over sports and things, and androids are obviously made to do work, but they all act and like have the normal strength of like whatever person they're built as, right? Yeah. So like Kara, who's just sort of a normal-looking woman, acts and has equivalent strength, right? She's just kind of frail and has to run away from everything. Luther, who is a fucking 8-foot tank, with that build has an equivalent strength to what you would expect from someone like that. And it's very weird because you just think robots would just have like basically superpowers.
Yeah, because like if you have like it isn't even like super strength, but like if you got like crushed under a cabinet, you would like your caretaker robot to be able to easily rescue you. Like that would be part of its design, clearly.
But and like Connor, who's a robot specifically designed to like work with the police, to be like the best investigator. Why isn't he like just real fast?
You're a lot of foot races.
Yeah, you gotta hunt down suspects, and like Kara can outrun you. Why? Well, I guess Kara's also a robot. Maybe they are going super fast, and everybody else is so slow. And so like every time you run into someone, that's why you come to a full stop, because like you've shattered their body, because you hit them at 1,000 miles an hour.
You literally run past humans a bunch, so.
Yeah, and you go through traffic, and the traffic will like wreck your shit. So. Yeah, I guess that theory doesn't hold. Robots suck in this game. They're just normal people that you have in your house, but
this actually that just speaks to what I think they should have done with Connor. They should have played him more like Inspector Gadget.
Yes.
Like you're chasing Kara, and he's like, "I got her, Hank," and then just wheels come out of his little feet, and he like looks super dorky, and
little rockets in his boots.
Yeah, and like he's just looking deadly serious. Like that would be so funny. Like if Connor
with the realistic physics, his jacket flying out behind him down the street.
Yeah.
This game could have been good.
Nope. I actually think.
Well, not with these controls, but like this idea was solid.
Yeah. That
because it's an easy idea.
That was the thing we were talking about before. This was, could this be a good game?
That's
the structure of the controls in the brain, trying to do like your pathways, open up different pathways. Could they ever be thorough enough that they actually make the choices feel like different pathways? Like, is the reason this is bad is just the sheer incompetence and laziness of the execution?
Well,
right?
Yeah.
Or do you think that a game with controls like this and the branching story like this could actually be like a fun experience?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say in a real way, because like you really have to remove the David Cage from this game, right? To even start with anything. But David Cage is so ingrained in every aspect of this game that like you're really left with just the premise. I think I'm kind of spitballing, but I think you could have a game with some branching storylines where stuff like character deaths can matter and things like that, and you can talk about androids becoming human or whatever you want to call it. You could just make this a buddy cop game like we said in the beginning, and it would have been better. But like, you can't have these controls. They don't apply to games. You can't have this hack writing. You can't have characters that change all the time, that are never consistent from a playthrough. I don't know. I think you have to strip out 99% of this game to even have a starting point.
100% the game should just be Connor. The other two pathways were just bad. right?
Yeah.
And then also all of the investigation stuff should be reworked. All the combat should be reworked.
Yeah.
All the dialogue.
Like let me pitch my game, right? Which is Connor and Hank in a buddy cop, right?
Mhm.
Connor plays the straight man. He shows up. He's just a straight up robot guy, right? And Hank is this down on his luck detective. He doesn't like robots. He doesn't really like anything. He's kind of lost his humanity too. And through them doing their investigations and seeing other robots that have become deviant in the ways that they act and things, you could even have something that's like the sex club with the Tracys, right? But you don't murder them and, do stuff like that. But like you can have them have meaningful interactions with androids that are deviant that show emotion and show what it is to become human. And through it, Connor becomes more deviant. And as he does, his friendship with Hank grows and Hank becomes more of a normal functioning human. And by the end, they're friends. They both learn something and they both kind of become human.
Yeah, if the last climax of the game is you can save Hank and make it so you can complete your mission, and then the end of the game is just Hank being like, "You're all right by me," and it would just be like kind of cute.
Could you imagine if this was just a single person focused narrative on basically Connor's journey, and the last thing you do is you find Hank basically on the edge of suicide, and because you are his friend, you are able to intervene because you've gained your humanity, because you now understand what he's going through, that kind of thing.
Like if Connor just said something as simple as like, we're now just like spitballing a better game because we have to do it. But if Hank was like, why shouldn't I kill myself? And Connor's like, because I'll miss you. Yeah. And that would be like...
honestly, like, you could cut to credits from that, and we'd have a better game still. You know?
And this is kind of born out of the fact that, like, Hank and Connor are overwhelmingly the best characters in the game. I think they made the best piece of gameplay in the game is this bit where you have to go to the archive to look at stuff, and you need a password. And then it goes, what's Hank's password? And there's 4 options. And one says fucking password. And everyone who's playing knows it's that.
Yeah.
Fucking password.
It's really good, right? Because Connor's at the console and he's like, what would a grizzled old detective's password be? And the 4 options pop up. One of them is just fucking password. And he's like, of course. And it's a bit that plays so well.
It's like the one time that the game showed you something and had a payoff that like integrated seamlessly with the gameplay.
Yeah, because Hank has a consistent character throughout the game.
Yeah,
and
it made you feel connected to
Yes, and you come to understand that. And when you see that as his password, you're like, of course it's that. And it's not a question. I don't think anybody is fooled by that. So I think at this point we've made it clear why this game is a tragedy. This is why I said I didn't feel bad poisoning the well, calling David Cage a hack in the beginning, because I think we've proved our point at this point. Don't play this game. Don't buy this game. It's not worth your time. It's not worth your money. Well, if you're desperate, watch a walkthrough. It's literally the same thing. You can't play it any different. So
don't watch a walkthrough. I mean, support a person who made a walkthrough video.
I suppose, but like,
or like we're like a 2-hour podcast about. Oh, too late! You're already here.
Oh,
gotcha.
Please listen to our next one. Please at me.
Yeah, please at me.
So the last thing I want to say about this game is actually the last thing that happens in the game, and I got to compare it a little bit to a different, better game has similar themes. So on the home screen of this game, there's displayed Chloe, who we talked about before. She was the first robot to pass the Turing test, and she serves as like when you pick menus and things like that, or when you do something in the game and you come back to the menu screen, she's like, "You let Kara and Alice die in that scene. Why would you do that?" Stuff like that. She kind of engages with you in the game, and then 90% of the time she just sits around looking extremely confused for some reason. At the end of the game, when you go back past the credits, she will ask you something along the lines of like, "Do you think I can also be free? Would you let me go?" And you can make the choice to let her go, and she walks off screen, never to return. And that's fascinating. It's a small thing, but it's fascinating that like you do in fact have one choice in this game that's like truly irrevocable. That has a lasting impact. And so of course players complained that their Chloe was gone. And so I think like 2 weeks after launch, they patched the game so you can get your Chloe back. Because the one real choice you made in this game, the one absolute choice, they were like, well, we don't want someone to feel left out. We don't want someone we don't want anybody's choice to truly matter. And I compare this to the final true ending of Nier Automata, which I'm going to say spoilers here, but it's not really. And I think people that want to play the game and want to play it to its completion should hear this first. It's not a story spoiler at all. Basically, you get to the end of the game and you have to fight the credits. And if you fail fighting the credits because they're incredibly hard. I would say impossible almost. It gives you the option. It's like, oh, you can get some helpers to help you. And then a bunch of other little ships show up and they help you fight the credits and you're successful. And after that, it says, would you like to give up your save file to help others do what you've done? And what it means is those little ships that show up are other people's save files who select yes to this question. And what it does, when one comes to help you and it dies in the credits, it like takes a bullet for you, it deletes that person's save file forever. So somebody in the world, you probably just lost like 10 people their save files because you wanted to see the ending. And it asks you if you want to do that for somebody else. And you can say yes or no.
That's really cool. It's like the death of the characters have like strands that like connect you to...
That's an interesting way of putting it.
Yeah,
like
I wish it was a game that explored that.
Like
that
a
we could talk
strand
about
type game? Like what could that be? But anyway, we're doing Death Stranding next time. Thanks for listening. If you got this far, please at me. bossdoor4 at Twitter.
No, it's at bossdoor4.
I don't know.
That's how Twitter works.
Damn it.
You say at bossdoor and then the letter 4.
Yeah, the letter 4. All right. And if you want to send us any kind of feedback, it's bossdoorpodcast at gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you think of the cast. So thanks for listening.